All right, good day, everyone. Welcome to the December 2023 FMDiSC meeting. Good to see many familiar faces here. We have a jam-packed meeting today, so we're going to plunge right in. Just a heads up in case you looked at the schedule or haven't looked at the schedule, we're not going to have breakout rooms today. We have such a bounty of presenters and interesting presentations, so we're not going to have breakout rooms or a break. We have a lot of great content to get through. So we're gonna kick it right off. Slight change in the schedule. Chris Moyer is going to start us off with the tech news roundup, and then we'll go into Wim's presentation right after that. So Chris, the floor is yours.
Here we go. All right, can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Yep. There we go, excellent. So welcome to the December edition of the Tech News Roundup. You'll notice a theme for this month. There's been a ton going on in the space, and I would be remiss not to talk about all the drama at OpenAI. If any of you have been paying attention to the news, Sam Altman, who runs the joint, was kicked out by the board in a power struggle. And what was it? 95% of the employees had threatened to quit. And 3 of the 4 board members who kicked him out are leaving, and he's coming back. One of the remainers is the Quora CEO, Adam D'Angelo. He's going to be joined on the board by Larry Summers, former Salesforce CEO Brett Taylor, who's going to be the chairman of the board, and they're looking to add as many as 6 more, and they may have done some of those already. And there was a lot of sort of murkiness around what the heck happened here and what was going on. Supposedly the dust up was over the fact that Altman was pursuing a bunch of side deals and keeping the board in the dark, preventing them from providing any sort of board oversight. Bloomberg said that he was trying to raise billions of dollars for a new chip venture to compete with NVIDIA and with some investors in the Middle East, so probably Saudi Arabia, what have you. And he was not being candid with the board. I'm going to get into the implications of that and why that could be a problem in a minute, but I don't know if this is pertinent to anybody, but OpenAI has a weird corporate structure. They have OpenAI itself, which is a nonprofit, which owns OpenAI Global, which is a for-profit thing. So the for-profit is owned by the nonprofit, which is sort of the inverse of how a lot of these companies do it. Various open source software projects that now have for-profit entities. The sort of community edition is owned by the profit entity and is put out there. And this is sort of an upside down company as a result. Sort of the ringleader of the group that was trying to oust Altman is Helen Toner, or was Helen Toner. She's not on the board now. She's the director of strategy for the Georgetown Center for Security and Engineering Technology. So she's deep embedded into the Washington, D.C. security apparatus. She studied AI, U.S.-China relations. She was appointed to watch over the intersection between AI and security risks. So she was really coming at this from, what are the national security implications of Altman's behavior? And so when he started running around the Middle East trying to cook up side ventures, that really got her hackles up. Also in October, her organization, the Center for Security and Engineering Technology, released a paper critical of OpenAI for releasing ChatGPT without what she cited as sufficient guardrails. So you could ask it how to do unethical things, for example. Initially, they've certainly tightened that up since then. And she was praising Anthropic, which is ChatGPT's competitor, Cloud AI. But let's move on because time is tight. There was an agreement, apparently, that has come to light that OpenAI agreed to buy $51 million of AI chips from a startup in which Sam Altman was an investor. So here's a conflict of interest situation that was reported on December 3rd. This was from Wired Magazine. Rain is the name of the startup. It was less than a mile from their headquarters. They were working on what was called a neuromorphic processing unit, or NPU, designed to replicate the functionality of the human brain. They signed a non-binding agreement to buy $51 million of the chips, but this is just sort of one thing, so hold that thought. Let's move on to the next slide. And a lot of people don't know that NVIDIA, so NVIDIA is the biggest name in GPU chips, which are used for gaming, they're used for AI, and they've been on a rocket ride. Their stock has been on a rocket ride all year long. But here's the thing that's important to know, and that is that the US government owns the rights to the UEV technology that NVIDIA gets to use in making their chips. They decided over 30 years ago that only US companies should be able to take advantage of EUV technology that was funded by the taxpayers. I don't want to get into the technical stuff. It was, an engineering impossibility for a long time. EUV is absorbed by glass and air, and so lasers, never mind. Intel, Canon, Nikon, as well as ASM and Silicon Valley Group all sought licensing for the technology, and Congress decided that Japanese companies having this technology while US companies did not was against our national interests, and so they denied them the necessary permission. They're perceived as being too strong of a technical competitor. And so they wanted to keep it at American companies. SVG was acquired by ASML, leaving a single company as the sole beneficiary of this. And so this, once upon a time, little minnow of a company, ASML, became the world leader in production of scanners and had a monopoly in this cutting edge technology. Because it's such a key technology, the US gets to say and gets to tell NVIDIA, no, you can't sell chips to those who we deem to be our economic competitors. So that's where this whole, the United States government being able to tell NVIDIA who they can and can't sell chips to outside of the United States. There's a little timeline over here on the right side of the screen. So they impose restrictions on these chips. And the whole time, NVIDIA, who doesn't like this at all, keeps trying to sort of, develop workarounds to circumvent these restrictions on the things. So the US imposing restrictions on the A100, then NVIDIA introduced the A800, then the US restricted that, and then they launched the HGX H20, and then, those are getting restricted. And so it's just been this constant cat and mouse game. But the important thing to know is that this technology, because it was government funded, the companies that use it get dictated to by the US feds. So by Altman trying to go outside, I guess I don't have a slide for that, but for Altman to go outside and get foreign investors to back a chip company to compete with this, NVIDIA and its ilk, is a huge problem, and it's a security problem. It's a national security problem, which is why the board member, what was her name? It was Helen Toner, yes. Why Helen Toner was so up in arms about all the shenanigans of Sam Altman. So there's a whole national security layer to the OpenAI Sam Altman boardroom drama that hasn't really been well reported, but it's a big deal, and is, it remains to be seen how this all play out, but it's kind of a wild ride. On the 5th, Meta and IBM announced their AI alliance. It's sort of an odd thing. This was posted in TechCrunch, but it was posted in a lot of places. They were talking about how more collaboration and information sharing will help the community innovate and stuff like that. This seems to be targeted at Google, OpenAI, Microsoft, Anthropic, Cohere, and Adept are not included. There are about 45 member organizations to this alliance. So there's a lot of jockeying in the AI space, I guess is the larger point. AMD and Intel, the research lab CERN are included. University like Yale, Imperial College of London, AI startups, Stability AI and Hugging Face are in. And so there seems to be this sort of jockeying between two distinct camps. And, it would take some digging to get into it, but clearly this is all about sort of competitive posture and stances and things like that. So there's a lot of jostling going on, and there's a lot of forces at play. And I think it's going to be a wild ride in the AI space for at least the next year, just to sort of see how all these cards fall. Couple other just bits of news. Broadcom cut 2,800 VMware jobs after completing the acquisition for VMware. A bunch of critical zero days were announced in Chrome and all Apple OSs. Google's threat analysis group found these. And both Apple and Google updates are automatically being pushed to devices, so it's good. So this is one of those good to know about, but it seems like they're handling it. Apple last Thursday said they were releasing security updates fixing 2 vulnerabilities present in iOS, macOS, and the iPad OS. Both of them reside in WebKit, which is the engine underneath Safari. It also affects Apple Mail, though, in the App Store and all browsers running on iPhones and iPads. So you couldn't miss getting tagged by these 0 days. So it's a good thing they brought those out. And I think I just have a couple more bug fixes. So there was Windows 11 released an update to improve Copilot and fix 11 different bugs. Windows Copilot started rolling out to Windows 11 22 H2 devices in September. It's now enabled by default on these systems. So you have the bug installed for free. Microsoft's threat intelligence team issued a warning about the Russian state-sponsored actor APT-28, also known as Fancy Bear, also known as Strontium, actively exploring the Outlook flaw to hijack Microsoft Exchange accounts and steal information. So, yay. Targeted entities were government, energy, transportation, and key industrial organizations in the United States, the Europe, and Middle East. WordPress. WordPress administrators were getting spammed by fake WordPress security advisories with a fictitious vulnerability tracked as CVE 2023-45124 to infect sites with a malicious plugin. So it has been caught and reported by WordPress security experts at WordFence and PatchStack, and they publish alerts on their sites. But if you are a WordPress site administrator and you're getting a security advisor about a plugin and are asked to install a plugin to mitigate the problem, watch out. So this was posted in, I forget which site I found this on. Anyway, Google it if you are a WordPress site administrator, and I think I will stop there.
Thanks, Chris. That was
Sure.
excellent as always. Just one little piece of news, I think it was just yesterday, that Apple released, I think it's an open source framework called MLX, which is supposedly helping developers who are using Apple Silicon chips take advantage of AI. It's supposed to be very efficient and allows a lot of this work to be done on device, as is Apple's preference for security reasons. So that'll be an interesting thing to see if that kickstarts, more AI sort of development work being done on Macs and iPhones and the like. So I think that was just announced yesterday, and it's a tool for developers. It's not something that would be probably relevant for most of us, but hopefully we'll see the ramifications of it in applications that we use.
Yeah, I don't know how many people on here do much with Xcode, but if you grab the beta version of Xcode, you can actually get the simulator for the new, VR goggles and stuff like that. And you have the ability, if you have something that will compile for iOS, like iPad version, you can just tick a flag and say, I want to also compile it for the VR goggles. And so you could take something that you built with FileMaker Go in the SDK and compile it for the iOS goggles and just have it float around your living room in front of your face. I don't know how useful that would be, but it's kind of cool that you can do it. But yeah, isn't
that what we all want, Chris?
That is what we all want. That's what I want, actually. But I don't know if everybody else does. But maybe in a future meeting, I might show something like that and see, just as a stupid pet trick. But I will let Wim get on with his activities here. So
thanks, Chris, as always. Yeah, so next up, we have Wim Decorte. The topic of the presentation is the monolith versus distributed architecture. And this is a presentation that Wim gave initially at Engage EU, which was just last month. So, Wim, if you also want to share any thoughts about your experience at Engage EU, I'm sure we'd all be interested to hear that as well. And the floor is yours.
Absolutely, thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, the Engage U was held in Antwerp, Belgium, my old stomping grounds, because that's where I hail from. And it was great. They had 200 people there, which is sort of what they were shooting for. The venue could only hold 250 or something like that, so it was just the right size. And I was reminded of how great it is to be in person and go to these events, right, where we do this knowledge sharing and great sessions, great content, and being able to chat in between these sessions and look at some of the vendor booths, look at some of the things that Vince is doing with his tool. It's the kind of place where you can pick all of that up, which is not so easy to do when we do these things virtually. So in that sense, I'm looking forward to Austin big time, and see if we can do that on a somewhat bigger scale. One of the things that I took back from that event is that these regional conferences, as I call them, the one they have in Europe, or they have several in Europe, Rome, Berlin, Antwerp, Australia, Japan. These regional conferences are gaining in importance, right? So the people from Claris were there, and they were not just there, right? They were very active. They were very, very present, which I really liked. And they're actively sponsoring these things. So it's great to go out there and be part of that. Having said that, let me jump right in. And this is a modified presentation of what I gave at that Engage You conference. So we're going to talk about, my name is Wim Decorte. Most of you know me, I'm sure. I run the FileMaker side of the house at Soliant, and we're going to talk about choices in building solutions. Specifically, we're going to talk about how I see that we now can and probably should architect things differently than we have been in the last 10, 15 years. And there's a reason, there's a context to why this is important to me, and also by extension, I think important to all of us. A lot of solutions, a lot of suffering solutions are brought to my doorstep, right? I'm personally getting involved in about 80 projects a year. At Soliant, we do something like 600 projects a year. But I get involved in about 80 of those. And they range the gamut from financial institutions, casinos, car and truck manufacturers, pharmaceutical, government research labs. And many of them turn out to be basically trying to put lipstick on a pig. Unfortunately, right? These are the solutions that are suffering, that have grown organically for the last 10, 15 years, and they just don't perform very well. And it's unfortunate, right? Because undoing what doesn't work well is very expensive. To many clients, they don't like paying to get back to where they think they already are, right? So that makes it very unfortunate. And it's also very often the place where the FileMaker platforms gets shunted because, quote unquote, clearly it cannot do what we want it to do. Whereas that's not always true, right? Like, and we'll talk about some of these things in a little more detail. Often it's just one aspect of the solution or a couple of these things in the solution that don't work well. And by re-architecting and using some of the technologies that have been around for a while, we can make things better. It's also one of the reasons why I can be somewhat pushy on the community forums when it comes to best practices, because if we do follow best practices, very often we can avoid the worst of these bad solutions. I think best practices are important, and really best practices are like it's like the condensed solution to a lot of pain that people have come up with. And they're rules of thumb, right? Like they're not things that you should follow blindly, but there's a lot of encapsulated knowledge in these best practices, which is why I think it's important. Before I get too deep into that, consider this, right? So because of what is brought to my doorstep, I have opinions on how to avoid that pain. And what I will propose does not apply to every single solution, all right? So if you're looking for a simple solution, a simple objective rule that applies always, then that doesn't work, right? It just doesn't work that way. So a lot of this is my opinion, but it does come from a lot of experience. taking a half step back, there are a few trends I think that are important that I see and that we need to consider. It also provides some context for things that I think we should need to take under consideration when I talk to the monolith and what happens. And the first one is a trend that we see, we have been seeing since before COVID, but it has been made more important because of COVID. Used to be, we could mount a solid defense at the edge of our network, right? Like that old castle and a moat. It's an approach that worked for a long while when there was a clear delineation between those inside and those outside of the network. So the moat around our castle would be things like firewalls, border routers, intrusion detection systems, intrusion prevention systems. But unfortunately now, a lot of our users are not inside the castle, right? They're not inside the network. They are spread all over the place. And there's also the expectation, well, there's the expectation that users can be everywhere, right? Like users don't necessarily have to go to an office anymore to work. But there's also the expectation of anywhere access on any device of their choosing. And what that means is that protecting that the perimeter has become a lot more difficult. And so a lot of that protection and prevention is now shifting to the identity. When you try to log in, are you who you say you are? And can we be absolutely certain that that's the case? OneLogin has this great infographic that sort of walks us through the different stages of authentication and proving that you are who you are so that you can get access to the resource that you want. So we're coming from this old thing where it was just a username and a password to two-factor and multi-factor authentication to where we are sort of now is it's a lot more contextual authentication, right? It's not just what you know, like the username and password. It's not just what you have, like a key or something like that, biometrics and all of that stuff. And we're also evolving to what's underneath there on that infographic to that authentication being done at a continuous basis, right? So a lot of shifting is happening in that authentication space. But that's pretty much where we are right now. So that's a trend that we have to keep in mind when we look at how we build solutions. The second trend is one that I've been seeing for a while, at least 5 years. We all know how difficult it is to deal with big IT, right? And their demands and their rules and all of that stuff. What I'm seeing is that a lot of smaller companies are outsourcing their IT. And that means that dealing with that IT and the smaller company, which used to be very simple, where we could basically be the consultant and dictate what the client can and should be doing, that has become a lot more difficult because even dealing with smaller companies means that we're really dealing with big IT because we're dealing with that outsourced IT and they have different demands, right? So we're finding ourselves having to defend ourselves a lot more even when we deal with smaller companies. And one prime example of that is that when you deal with these outsourced companies that think like big IT, they will have an opinion on that thing like we just talked about, like the way that you authenticate, and that the fact that a FileMaker solution shouldn't be an identity store in its own rights, and they will want to use things like multi-factor authentication and all of that good stuff. Here's another trend, and we've been doing collectively, we've been already doing a lot of these things, right? We've been integrating our FileMaker solutions with a lot of services that are out there, and that's great, right? It also makes for better acceptance with bigger IT and all of these things, right? Because a lot of these things, the reason why we integrate with these things is because they solve problems, right? We don't want to set out to write something like MailChimp or an accounting system or things like good file management that we have with Dropbox or Box.com, stuff like that. So these things exist. They're really, really good at what they do. They provide good APIs, and we're finding ourselves integrating with them a lot more. And for me, that is the essence of what I see that's different between FileMaker solutions today and FileMaker solutions from 5 or 10 years ago. At the core, we still want to do the things that are unique to the business's workflows and do that in FileMaker because we can do that well. We can do that in a nimble fashion. We can pivot. We can change as the business changes. But the things that work really well that don't need to be done in FileMaker, we can leave those outside FileMaker and just integrate with that. So what if we extend that model a little bit to the things that are not pre-built services, right? If there's pieces of functionality that we're inclined to build in FileMaker, but maybe we don't need to or we shouldn't, right? So keep that in mind. That's sort of where we're going with some of this. Because this is definitely in play, right? This is, people tend to rely on information that is already familiar to them when they're making decisions. And what it means for FileMaker developers is that we tend to gravitate to building things in FileMaker because we can. That's our familiar space. And it's a real thing, right? So we need to be aware of that. Another way of looking at that is that old saying that if all you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And that's true for all of us, right? Whether we're just FileMaker developers or we are FileMaker developers plus other developers, we will always gravitate to the things that we know well. So this is not a judgment, right? It's reality. But it can also lead to glass ceilings where there are things that we can do better by using something else, but we need to be able to get through that glass ceiling and break through that. Right. And mind you, this is not about ditching FileMaker wholesale, right? I'm not saying FileMaker is bad, so you need to start looking at non-FileMaker things. This is really about supplementing what is good about FileMaker with what is really good at something else, right? We can actually make FileMaker stand out more by not doing things. This is one of these cases where almost less is more. And there's two more things there to consider. The fear of missing out. And the fear of joining in, and those can be at play at the same time. We see some FOMO, for instance, at this point with AI, where businesses think they see all of this stuff about AI and all like, I should be doing something with that. It's just not clear what I need to do with that. On the developer side, we see some of that fear of joining in, where a lot of the developers, for instance, with JavaScript, they know that JavaScript can do wonders for them. But it's like, yeah, I need to go and learn this other thing and don't really want to, don't know how to begin doing that. So these things are something that we need to break through there as well. And I think there's an antidote to this familiarity bias and that glass ceiling. And the first one, it's a saying that I'll project here, but this first sentence here, we all have this, right? Every single one of us here is smart enough to learn and pick up new skills. After all, we got proficient with the FileMaker platform, and that's no small feat, right? So clearly, we have that gift. We also mastered this one too, right? We've learned to learn. It's a skill that we have. The third one is the one that I probably will push on a little bit today, right? It's the willingness to learn and acquire those new skills, because we know we can. That's not a problem. It's the willingness to go there. And I didn't invent this, right? I just borrowed this from Mr. Herbert there. And there's one more thing to consider. It's one thing that I'll talk about this in Austin. We simply don't pay enough attention to this. These are the aspects of disaster recovery, business continuity. And I've blogged about this over 10 years ago. And it's one of my long-held contentions that we are good developers, but are we good deployers? We tend to be developer-focused, meaning that we tend to spend a lot of time thinking about how to make our lives better. And that's the phase of any project where we think about how the ease of deployment, the ease of writing the code. That's not really where our clients get their value from, right? Our clients get the value when we're done with development and we actually go to deploy. And then hopefully the deployment is stable, it's fast, it's secure. That's when our clients get the value out of running that solution for many years, or at least a couple of years, 3, 5 years, 7 years, whatever. I'm sure we all have solutions that have been deployed for 10 plus years. That's when our clients get value from, right? They don't get it from us developing. That's their cost, right? That's when they're sitting there waiting and paying our invoices. I did a recap of that a little earlier in the year when I talked about whose fault it is, because these things come up all the time on the forums where people are asking, like, I did my best, I developed it to the best of my ability, and now it's on a server somewhere and it just keeps falling over. Not my problem. I think it's our problem. I think it's something that we need to pay attention to. All right, I'll repeat what I said a little earlier. There's no dogmas, right? There's no good or bad way to go about that. Having said that, meet the monolith, right? And I will define the monolith in two different ways. The first one is the monolith as a FileMaker solution where everything is stuffed into a single file, right? So that's one definition of a monolith. And then the second one is a FileMaker solution where with the functionality in that FileMaker solution is hard to do within FileMaker sweet spot, right? So these are the two ways that I will define a monolith. And the end result very often is a turd, right? And maybe not at first, maybe it started off well, but then more data got added, more functionality got added, more users got added. It's now under a heavier load, and it just doesn't stack up anymore, right? This is where the clients get to complain about us, and by extension, and that's where the danger is about the FileMaker platform. So we got to be mindful of that, right? So when I said that breaking up that there's no dogmas is also there's not a single good way to go about that. Breaking up a monolith is not a guarantee that you'll end up with bliss, right? Because maybe you'll just end up with this, right? So now you'll have smaller turds, but you have more turds. So we got to be mindful of not going with something just because it's there. We got to be thinking about why it is that we do something. And maybe you are, or your client is already extremely happy with the solution. There's really no need to break anything up, right? Or is there? Maybe there are opportunities to sort of future-proof the solution by breaking it up. If you have a monolith and you're happy with the way it is right now, maybe now is a good time to think about that so that it doesn't become a hair on fire emergency down the road. Right? So that's what I really meant with no dogmas. Just because we can, it doesn't mean that we should. So think about that, right? Like I said, I have opinions on how to do things, and I have somewhat a set way to at least think about the options. Because at the end of the day, I think a good software engineer is one who knows that there are many options, and then has the ability to look at each one of those and build a proof of concept to try out different approaches and to see which one fits best, right? If we are limiting ourselves to basically just a single option by trying to do everything in FileMaker or trying to do everything in a single FileMaker file, we're not doing ourselves, and by extension, our clients, any good with that. So we'll talk about breaking up that monolith there. And the first part is, the first scenario is where the monolith is everything is in a single FileMaker file. And when we need functionality that doesn't exist in FileMaker, we turn to plugins. That's sort of like the default, right? And cramming everything into a single FileMaker file is something that has been adopted since FileMaker 7, right? Yes, you can have 1 million tables in a single FileMaker file. Doesn't mean that you should, because very often you'll end up with something like this. And this is not even a huge file, right? This is actually a fairly common size for a FileMaker solution. This one is 60 gigs, and it's from an actual client file. Please don't go there, right? Like, please don't do that, because there's so many things that we miss out on when we do that. Like if we cram everything in a single FileMaker file. The first one, for instance, is every time that FileMaker server, because I'm assuming that this file is hosted on FileMaker server, every time that FileMaker needs to write to that file, it'll offload the locking of that file to the operating system. Different operating systems behave slightly differently, but at the end of the day, a write means that the file has to be locked. If you just have a single file, that means that that particular file will get locked and is at risk of creating a funnel for a lot of these operations that you have going in your solution, right? Because maybe your solution has different functional areas with different users working in this area and that area. But if it all goes to a single FileMaker file, you've now set yourself up for performance issues down the road because you've created an artificial funnel because of these exclusive locks on writes. Similarly, there's hard linking on backups. This feature has been around for 10+ years, and it's still not very well understood. But FileMaker Server can be really efficient at running backups if not everything is in a single file. If you have that monolith, that 60 gig file, if you make a change and you just change one character in one field in one record, the next backup run will need to find 60 gigs worth of disk space for that whole file because you changed the file. So not only you do need the backup space, the disk space for that, but the operating system and FileMaker server will now have expend resources in writing 60 gigs worth of data because you changed one character, right? Hard linking on backups, if you have multiple files, can really alleviate a lot of these performance issues and the backups. Because we see this all the time. It's at that point that people start not backing up, right? Because backups affect the users. Backups are slow. So people don't back up, and then you get back into that disaster recovery business continuity thing where something goes wrong and they just don't have backups, or they've lost a full day's worth of work because they only do their backups at night. Parallel backups is another feature that plays really well if you have multiple files. It's a newish kind of feature that I'll get into that a little bit there. Faster restores, right? This goes, this speaks to that disaster recovery and business continuity. If you have multiple files, you can restore a lot of these things at the same time, and you don't have to wait for a single file to copy over. And this sort of speaks to also, if you have different functional areas in your solution, if you break up your solution across those functional areas, you can restore functionality to certain groups of users, while maybe the ones that have bigger files will need to wait. But you can do that if you have multiple files. You cannot do that if everything is encapsulated in a single file. Same at go lives. If you use the data migration tool, if you have multiple files, you can really speed up the go lives by using multiple data migration tool runs at the same time. We blogged about this at Soliant. We actually wrote a tool around the data migration tool that will figure out, based on the number of files and the sizes in your solution, which files to do in which order so that you can get through the data migration tool in the shortest possible time, which is something you can do if you have multiple files. You can't do it if you have a single file. And we know that at some point, Claris is going to give us this patch tool. So the same will apply when we do a go live by patching instead of migrating data. So we'll be able to do the same thing. If you're thinking about modules of functionality, right? So you can share code between areas of your solution, between solutions, even if you do that in multiple files. You can't do that very well if you have a single monolithic file. All right. So a quick word on that parallel backups, because it's a kind of new feature. And we have to understand how FileMaker does backups. FileMaker server does backups sequentially, right? It starts at file 1, goes to file 6, or whatever, how many files that you have. That's the way it's been done since forever. With parallel backups, FileMaker server will learn patterns of how transactions get committed. And I don't mean 19.6 style transactions, but actually writes to the file kind of transactions. So FileMaker server will learn which files get transactions committed at the same time, and FileMaker server will divvy up your files in groups, and it can then back up these groups in parallel. Files within a group still get backed up sequentially, but if you have enough files in your solution, the total backup time gets shortened, sometimes significantly, by this parallel backups feature, right? It only works if you have multiple files. And of course, there's counter arguments, right? I'm not blind to the compromises that you have to make when you use multiple files to make up your FileMaker solution, right? So there's really isn't a thing that comes for free. So there's always going to be compromises to make, and a lot of that has to do with common schema elements, right? That's when I talk about developers or talk to developers about not doing everything in a single file. These are the arguments that come up at the same time. Yes, but I need to duplicate my custom menus, my custom functions, my privilege sets, my accounts. And it's true to some extent. That's what I meant by I'm not blind to them. But this is very developer-centric, right? This is to make our life easier. All of the benefits that I mentioned are going to be the ones that make the life of our clients easier by remaining performant, by being able to restore and go through disaster recovery business continuity efforts much quicker. Right, so keep that in mind, because I don't particularly like these arguments because they make our life easier, not necessarily our clients' things. And there's counter arguments to the counter arguments, like how many times do you actually change a custom function, right? And how painful is it if you have to do it 5 times? Probably not that much. And certainly for the privilege sets, I think that's an easy one to push back on, because privilege sets speak to typically to the scripts and the tables that exist in a particular file, right? The efforts to create a privilege set specific to a file isn't that different than creating a privilege set for a huge file where you have to cater to multiple tables or to many tables potentially. And certainly for the accounts, right? That is probably the single biggest argument that I hear all the time. And my counter argument to the counter argument on that one is that you really should be thinking external authentication at this point, right? This goes back to that trend that I mentioned, where identity is the new frontier in protecting resources within smaller and bigger companies. And FileMaker plays really well in this, right? To me, it makes no sense whatsoever for a FileMaker solution and a FileMaker file to be an identity store, right? Identities should be kept in a place where they can be governed, monitored, and all of these things in a central location. And FileMaker, like I said, plays really well in this realm where you can pretty much use any identity provider that's out there with a FileMaker solution. And what you see there on the screen, that's not an exhaustive list. That's just a list of identity providers that we have already used with clients up to this point, and there's many more that we can use. So that would be a huge recommendation to basically adopt external authentication wherever you can. And you inherit a lot of these features that are important to IT departments, all right? You get features like multi-factor authentication for free. Passwordless authentication into a FileMaker solution. Yes, absolutely possible. Stephen Blackwell and I showed some of that with YubiKeys not too long ago. The newish kind of passkeys play into this realm very well as well, right? So all of that adaptive authentication that is coming down the road, you get that when you use an identity provider that is not internal FileMaker accounts. All right, so we talked about a monolithic FileMaker solution where everything is crammed into one file and why that's not really a good idea. So what I'm really shooting for here is to break that up into something that is more like that, right? So, and how do you go about that? You're trying to find the breakpoints, and this is not about breaking it up along the lines of the traditional data separation, right? It's not about separating the UI from the data. This is really more about looking for those breakpoints that will give you the best performance, the best possibility to do DR and BC, and the best reusability, right? So look for default lines in your solution along those lines, so that you can use things like those, the backup efficiency and all of these good things. All right, so that's one way to break up the monolith. The second way that we can think about monoliths is when we think about architecture, right? So this is not so much about everything in a single file where we just supplement with plugins. This is really more along the lines of extending the way that we think already by adopting solve problems, right? But instead of thinking about systems or services that we can integrate with, what if we can think about just pieces of functionality that we can potentially not do in FileMaker? FileMaker would still be at the core of the solution, but there may be things that we cannot do in FileMaker. And what does that look like? So that would look something like this, right? And you've heard me talk about microservices before, but that's really what it means, right? So you take a piece of functionality that you would tend to do in FileMaker and you don't do it in FileMaker. Then, of course, FileMaker will need to communicate with that, whatever tech stack, whatever mechanically you write that code in to have it executed. And these days, that would mean something that is a microservice, because FileMaker is really good at integrating with APIs, right? So ideally, you would write that piece of functionality or rewrite that piece of functionality in something that is an API, so that FileMaker can then use the native tools that it has, JSON, insert from URL with all of the curl options to communicate with that piece of functionality. And of course, if you have that kind of architecture where you now have things in running outside FileMaker in microservices, now you can use that in other things, and not necessarily FileMaker things. Yes, you can reuse that in other FileMaker solutions, but you can use that for web apps, right? Because now you have a piece of functionality that is really an API. It can be called from anything that can consume an API, be it FileMaker or be it something else. Some use cases of where we have used this already, right? So this is not theoretical. This is some of the things that we have taken out of FileMaker solutions because they were getting in the way. PDF generation is a big one. We got called on to work on a client that was ready to ditch FileMaker because their solution was really slow. And this was a classic example where when we looked at it, what that solution did a lot, and I mean thousands of PDFs per hour, they were generating PDFs. But the generation of the PDFs wasn't really the core of the solution, right? The core of the solution was the workflows that led to collecting the data, reorganizing the data that then needed to be output to PDF. But it was the outputting to PDF that was slowing everything down to the point that because the client was thinking like our output is PDF, so FileMaker is not good at that. So FileMaker clearly isn't a good fit because we need to be outputting PDFs. And like I said, the core wasn't that outputting of the PDFs, although that was the most visible thing that came out of the system. It was everything that led to being able to output PDFs. So we solved the problem by basically setting up a microservices that are inherently more scalable horizontally, vertically. Horizontally mean we can spin up more microservices next to each other to do things in parallel. Vertically means that we can assign more power to these microservices because they run on their own machines away from the FileMaker solution. And we basically saved FileMaker in that space, right? Because the problem went away and they could focus on the things that were important to them. Similarly, if you need to deal with large pieces of JSON that you get from somewhere else or that you generate from FileMaker, FileMaker is really good at parsing JSON, but it's not a computational powerhouse. So if you have to parse through large things of JSON, FileMaker isn't really good at that. But you can take that out of FileMaker. You can pass the JSON to and from your microservice and then use libraries like JSON-Other or JQ, which are really great at these kinds of things. Similarly, if you're still dealing with XML and you need to convert that to JSON, we deal with XML all the time. If you do SAP integrations, for instance, or anything that is a SOAP-based service, you'll deal with XML all the time. Converting XML to JSON wouldn't be something that I would want to do in FileMaker. In JavaScript, this is really all that it takes, right? And this is basically all the code for a microservice endpoints. And this is an Express JavaScript thing. And really, the thing where the XML to JSON conversion happens is on line 8. That's all it takes in JavaScript to convert XML to JSON. It's that simple, right? You cannot do this simply, this fast, and this performance in FileMaker. By extension, this goes to pretty much any format conversion that you want to do, right? There's libraries out there that can do that and do that extremely well. I already mentioned FileMaker isn't the computational powerhouse, and I'm not knocking FileMaker. FileMaker has a sweet spot, but if you have to have a solution that needs to compute a lot of things, run through scenarios, do simulations, that kind of thing, I wouldn't do that in FileMaker, right? Everything that leads up to having to run these simulations or then have to work with the result of these simulations, that's what FileMaker is good at. But don't run these computationally heavy things in FileMaker. Do something with that. Any kind of text manipulation to some extent goes into that, right? If you have to have HTML and you got to strip it, any kind of regular expressions, these are all things that you can do very well outside of FileMaker. These are some other examples. And the thing that you get, the thing that you inherit by using something that is outside of FileMaker is you get to do these things asynchronously. Asynchronous is very difficult to do in FileMaker. We have the perform script on server. We have the perform script on server with no waits. And now we have the perform script on server with callback, which is basically not you call the perform script on server, you don't wait for the result, but you can still get a notification back. So now we can get to do some things asynchronously in FileMaker. But an architecture that embraces that from the get-go can do all of these things asynchronously. And then, because these can talk back to FileMaker very well and very easily. Another use case, and this actually just came up on a Slack channel before this meeting, is any kind of thing where there is an existing SDK, right? And many services have them where instead of creating all the API calls in FileMaker from scratch by reading the API documentation, you can adopt their SDK and then set up your own API that uses their SDK and make things really simple. This is a quick example of using the AWS S3 SDK. If you ever have to work with AWS, you know that the API calls to authenticate against any AWS service can be really painful. If you do this in JavaScript with a web app, or sorry, with a web service, then you would have this in a .environment file, which is basically just your secrets. And then you call this, in this case, new S3 client, which is just part of their SDK. And that's as simple as it gets to authenticate. And then basically restoring a file from, say, Glacier, something that's in a bucket, is as simple as that. And the relevant lines is the first line and the third line. The rest is basically just a try-catch construct. But these two lines, where I basically call on the restore commands and then basically do the await and then send that command to S3, that's as simple as it gets to restoring a file from an S3 bucket using their SDK, right? So I can encapsulate that into something that I write in JavaScript and just have FileMaker call that, and I'm done. All right. So at this point, let me go back real quick there. At this point, we're basically, for this particular type of architecture, we're not really thinking about full-blown services like MailChimp or QuickBooks or anything to integrate that. We're thinking more about libraries that exist that do something really well that we can choose to use for FileMaker to call, specifically for things that FileMaker isn't really good at, right? Things that are painful in FileMaker that we can basically break out of FileMaker and do somewhere else by using these libraries, not full-blown services, but libraries that exist elsewhere. And I'm not really talking about things like webhooks, where you have some system that needs to talk to FileMaker. You can do that, of course, really well in FileMaker. And there's an older Engage presentation that I did about all things webhook. But this is not really about webhooks. This is really about having FileMaker talk to something else, right? Not something else talking to FileMaker. Backwards there. Apologies for that. Let me go back to where I was, which is here. All right. So at this point, I'm hoping that you're somewhat interested in at least thinking about how to go about that. It's a way of thinking that we've adopted within Soliant for the last 4 or 5 years, right? Where when we think about building something, we don't default to not building them in FileMaker. That's not what I'm saying. But as part of the evaluation of how we should be doing things, we will think about things and look for opportunities to do things in the best possible way, including not doing things in FileMaker, so that we can leave FileMaker to the things that it's really good at, right? And we had a bit of an interesting journey there, right? Because we thought for FileMaker developers to adopt that and break through that glass ceiling that many of us have, myself included, we thought that, and clearly we're not concerned about the FileMaker aspect. Everybody here already knows how to use FileMaker to call an API. That's knowledge that is really well embedded and entrenched right now. So I'm not worried about that. It's about the knowledge of creating that thing outside of FileMaker. And we thought that the biggest hurdle was not knowing JavaScript, right? So we basically look for courses and all of that stuff, get people through JavaScript, get them familiar with JavaScript. But it turns out that that wasn't really the hurdle. The hurdle was all the practical stuff, right? It's on how do you build it? Like, what if you can Google or ChatGPT for a particular JavaScript function, right? Finding that isn't the issue. And we're smart enough that we can then learn how to read the JavaScript things and all of that. But it's like now, okay, now you have a bit of JavaScript code. Where do you put it? How do you go about that? Right. So that was the thing that that really was holding us back in more wholesale adopting of these things, right? Because if you're a developer and you don't know how to build it, even though you can find the code, you're going to say, well, I'm not going to do that. It's too difficult. I don't know how to go about that, right? So these were the problems that we needed to solve. How do you build it? How do you run it in your testing? And then how do you deploy these things, right? When we talk about a microservice, it's really just a very small web server, right? That's really what it is. It's something that sits there, listens, so that you can make curl calls to it, and then it'll send back a response. When you think web server, you're thinking about the big ones that we have there. That's really, we don't need to go there right now, because when you build something in, say, JavaScript, because using JavaScript would make a lot of sense, you basically get a web server right there for you, right? So when you set out to build things, you have to pick a tech stack. And for many of us, using JavaScript would make a lot of sense, because there's a lot of synergies with JavaScript elsewhere in FileMaker. But it doesn't need to be JavaScript. If you want to do this in Ruby or Python, .NET, doesn't really matter, but you got to pick one. We pick JavaScript, and then we pick Express, which is the framework that can use Node.js. Node.js really is nothing more than the engine that was taken out of the browser, so it can be standalone and it can execute JavaScript. That's really what Node.js is all about. And Express is a nice framework that can build APIs for us. It's by no means the only one. You can use tools like Node-RED. We talked about these things. N8 is another one that can provide more visual builders that can get you through that learning curve faster. We use Visual Studio Code a lot because that's the IDE to write these things in. And then when it comes to running and deploying it, as a developer, you want to be running these things on your machine first, right? Because this is really all about, like, can I do this? Does it run? Can I write my code and then test it? You don't want to be throwing this at a server or having to set up a server just to be able to test your code, right? So again, Visual Studio Code does that really well. When you have a Node Express thing, all that takes is that one code, that one command there, npm start, and then you have basically a fully functional web service, which is a web server right there on your machine. Then you turn to your favorite tool like Postman, and then you can use HTTP localhost, and you can test your microservice right there, right? So writing that stuff, it takes some practice to do it, but you can do it as a developer all on your own machine. It doesn't need anything fancy like servers and all of that good stuff to set up. Even if you want to test it from the outside, right? So there's tools like ngrok, which you can get for free. And with ngrok, it's just a command line. What it does, and there's the command line where basically I give it a host name, which would be dev.eds.fm, which basically is a URL that anybody in the world can then touch. And I point it to a particular internal port on my machine. And what really happens is that it's my machine that initiates a tunnel. So I don't need to fiddle with firewalls or anything like that. And as long as I keep that tunnel alive on my machine, anybody from the outside can now use that URL, that DNS name, and basically it'll get forwarded to that running microservice on my machine, right? So if this is a multi-developer kind of thing where some other developer needs to test your microservice, you can do that. Again, all on your machine without spending money on servers and all of that good stuff, right? So this goes back to what I mentioned. A good architect, a good software engineer, we know how to do this from our own machines, and it means that if we can do this from our own machines, we have options to explore that we're not limited to because we don't know how to deploy these things or do that. ngrok actually also gives you a very nice web interface to monitor your incoming calls and see exactly what's being sent, what's being returned, all of that good stuff. I won't spend too much time on the deployment side. We use PM2, which is a very free process manager for running these things. So when you have a Node.js Express microservice, you can deploy it very well. You can actually deploy multiple at the same time on the same machine. and it has some built-in scalability. It can spawn up multiple of these things automatically if it's under load. So you get some load balancing, all of that good stuff. I do want to plant a little seed on reverse proxying because when you build a microservice and you need to deploy it at a client, you'll want to put it where a web server can run it, right? So for instance, and I'm not saying that it's the best possible deployment, but if you have a microservice that is tightly coupled to a FileMaker server or FileMaker functionality, you could run that microservice on the FileMaker server machine, right? You've got to be careful with performance and security and all of that good stuff, but you can. And because every FileMaker server has a web server, IIS on Windows, Apache on macOS, Nginx on Ubuntu, you'll want to pipe those microservice calls to that through that web server that's already there, and you do that by reverse proxying, right? Reverse proxying is just a fancy term of basically having an endpoint that you can talk to. That endpoint will act as a traffic cop to say, oh, I see traffic that needs to go there, I'll direct that traffic to go there. If you haven't never looked at how FileMaker server uses the web server, FileMaker server uses reverse proxying all the time. That screenshot there is IIS on Windows, and you see all of these reverse proxies for different pieces of functionality, like the admin console, the data API. FileMaker uses reverse proxies for these things, right? Because the data API it's its own microservice in essence, right? That's how FileMaker server itself is already architected. It uses that kind of microservice architecture. So we can very easily add our own rules to that for anything that we want to expose as a microservice very easily. This is an Nginx reverse proxy definition. Don't need to linger on that too much. Just know that it's possible. I can walk you through that if you ever want to have a more detailed presentation specifically on the mechanics for doing a lot of these things. Happy to do that. It's typically at the moment of deployment that the skill sets diverge a bit, right? That's typically where FileMaker developers will feel uncomfortable because now you got to deploy these things. You got to put it on a Linux box. We're not all that familiar with that. If we look down the future, we'll see some of that. This is actually from a Linux presentation I did years ago where I hinted at some of that feature where FileMaker server could become a Docker or a container. Right, so clearly we're going there where these microservices wouldn't be deployed to specific servers necessarily, but that you would basically use Dockers for these things, right? And if you have a Docker, at some point you'll have multiples, and you need to orchestrate them, which is what Kubernetes comes into play. And clearly, that's where you go like, yep, my eyes glaze over, that's too much. And that's true, right? I don't expect FileMaker developers to ever become proficient at these things. It's important to know that this is some of the technologies that sit behind some of these things, because where we're going is from here, and many of us are not already here, right? Where we don't already automatically think about taking pieces of functionality out of FileMaker and throwing out a microservice, using libraries that are really good at that, where a lot of the world is already one step ahead of this one, where we're thinking about this, right? Where we're not thinking about deploying microservices, but we're thinking about deploying functions. And this is where I think as FileMaker developers, when we do find code that works really well, and then I asked the question, like, where do I put that code, right? If we can deploy functions, that's when we will be able to do that without having to think about the mechanics of deploying these things and do all of these things. And you may be thinking, well, that's what AWS Lambda does, right? Or Azure functions or Google functions. Exactly, that's what these things do. But then you may be thinking, well, there you go with your cloud stuff, right? Maybe I'm not ready to throw everything at a cloud and all of that good stuff. You don't need to, right? Functions as a service is a thing. That's really what Lambda and Google functions and Azure functions are all about, functions as a service. You can deploy that on-premise, right? OpenFaaS is one of those, FASD is another one. Behind the scenes, they use things like that, Kubernetes, Docker images, all of that good stuff. This was from my presentation. I won't go there too deeply. But this is what it looks like, right? If you deploy functions OpenFaaS specifically, This is the interface that you get, right? Where it says, give me a Docker image, name your function, and basically then what you get is a URL, what I have highlighted in yellow, right? That is now a URL that you can call from inside FileMaker that will execute that function, right? If you ever see this in action, and maybe we should do a session on that at some point, it'll totally blow your mind, because the back end of that stuff is not stuff that we as FileMaker developers will ever want to care about. But once you deploy that, and deploying that isn't that hard, you now have these things where you can just have a function, have a place to put that function. It'll create the Docker image for you in the background, and then the end result is just a URL that you can call. It's really that simple. And it's magic, right? So I have that deployed, no surprise. I have that deployed across a couple of Raspberry Pis that are self-healing, all of that stuff. I mentioned open files. There's also this one, FastD. If you have some spare cycles, if you're interested in functions as a service, I would say Google FastD and have a look at that. I actually would want this to be deployed with FileMaker Server. That would be so cool. And it wouldn't be a huge stretch of imagination to see how this could be done. Where imagine an admin console where you can have a place to say, I have this JavaScript function, here it is. FileMaker Server, you take care of it. Just give me a URL to call when I need it, right? Impossible? I don't think so. This technology already exists, and Claris can build it for us. People like Proofgeist, people like One More Thing, people like us at Soliant, we can build these things, and that's sort of what we're playing with here to make all of that happen. And like I said, when you see it in action, it's close to magic, right? Where you have a function, you put it somewhere, and you get a URL, and you can call it, and you're done, right? So, so that was breaking up the monolith. The second part, we're talking about pieces of functionality, where you have your FileMaker solution, and you try to do every single piece of functionality in FileMaker. And what we would want to see happen is when we think about that, where we at least consider the option of not doing that, right? Where we say, I have something that needs to be faster than FileMaker can deliver. I'll put this as a microservice. And using that as a microservice right now, like I'm not saying don't go microservices, go function as a service. No, it's totally fine to do these things as microservices, because a lot of that power in building microservices is within grasp of pretty much every single FileMaker developer. Just know that there's these things out there already that can make that even more powerful, more scalable, more easy to deploy when we think about functions as a service, right? So some of these breakpoints that we would be looking for is, do these things exist as a solved problem? PDF generation, right? There's wonderful libraries that can do PDFing. Text parsing, right? Conversions, all of these things already exist as libraries, so they're solved problems. It's pretty much a given that they'll perform better than anything we can do in FileMaker, right? And by embracing that, not doing things in FileMaker but doing them somewhere else, you will inherit that scalability pretty much automatically, right? Where things can scale up and down automatically under load as you see fit, without you having to do much of anything. You typically don't have to write code to make things scalable, because these things are scalable out of the box. All right, so if there's one thing that I would want you to take away from that, is that don't let the solution that your clients use every day, don't let that become a turd, right? Like look for options to make it shine and break it apart, whether it's a FileMaker file that is too big and we're forgoing a lot of the benefits that we get from not having a single big file, to looking for pieces of functionality that we can not do in FileMaker and get better scalability, better performance. Look for those, and certainly we can discuss among ourselves for some of these things that we've already done, or at least the things that we are considering doing that way. So that's what I want to leave you with. You have options.
Thanks, Wim.
And that's what I have.
That was great. Really appreciate that. Do we have questions? We have a few minutes to address any questions. I see in the chat some, you touched on the third rail of FileMaker development, single file versus multi-file. And so we had a few comments.
Yep, there's one there from Bob where he's saying that doesn't adding external functions and increase potential breakpoints. Absolutely, right? That is one of the compromises you make, is you do introduce more dependencies, right? But to some extent, we already do that when we think about plugins, right? So if we extend functionality by using plugins, that's a dependency that you now have to manage. It's the same when you not do something in FileMaker, you do something else or somewhere else. It's something that you need to deploy. Even if you deploy it on your FileMaker server, it's still something that you need to deploy, maintain, all of these things, right? So that's what I meant by there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? Like you need to think about the compromises that you make when you go left or you go right? There's a compromise when you do things entirely and only within FileMaker, and there's a compromise you need to make when you don't do that. So it's to some extent, it's a cost benefits analysis that you make for these things, where you go like, okay, I get better performance, I get better scalability by doing it there, and here are the consequences of doing that.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
When you're talking about using libraries for your functions or your JSON or whatever, how do you go about locating reliable libraries and evaluating the quality of the code you find there?
Yep, it's a really good question, and it's something that we talk about internally as well. Let me share my screen again. Sort of assuming that you'll do things in JavaScript, right? That's what we do. There's these collections of libraries, and a lot of that is NPM when it comes to JavaScript, where like JSONada is one of those libraries that we use all the time. It's extremely fast at parsing through JSON. It can aggregate. You can actually write queries against your JSON. That's what JSONada does. So a couple of things. You look for these things, like how popular is it? Like how many downloads per week does that library get? One other thing is like, when was it last updated, right? So there's a couple of metrics that you have to keep in mind. Obviously, this is a very popular one. There's libraries on there that get 14 million downloads a week, right? Sometimes you find a library that go like, oh, this looks very promising. And you go like, oh, it gets 2 downloads a week and it was last updated 9 years ago. Should I use it? Right? So this sort of speaks to a concern. Something that we do need to consider is now we have a dependency. Like if we set out to use this, there's a dependency there, right? So we need to make sure that these people update it regularly. Maybe we need to screen that for security as best as we can. Maybe read up a little bit before we start going about that. But there's information available to us that will help us make good decisions around these things.
Thanks, Wim.
Other questions, comments? I see a few other comments in the chat. Dave weighed in on the single file, multi-file debate. We don't necessarily have to go into that. I'm just scrolling through to see if there's anything else. Anybody else have anything they want to discuss? Let's see. Doug, it looks like you're sharing your screen.
Yep, and certainly, like I said, feel free to argue and tell me that I'm talking out of my ass, right? It's because there's a lot of benefit in having these conversations and talking through the pros and cons. Because like I said, there's no free lunch, right? Like you have to make compromises, you make decisions to get the benefit, but you also have to assume whatever risk or extra responsibility that comes with going that way.
Right. Have you run into situations where a library or a function you're relying on has been deprecated or upgraded to a new version and they're discontinuing support for the previous version or changing the API? Obviously, most people try to keep backwards compatibility, but depending on the organization, they may or may not, value that.
Absolutely. We have run into these things. the way that you write JavaScript code, though, is you can manage that, right? Like it's not like you need to automatically update in your code. You can say I'm relying on this library up to this version,
Right.
so that you'll never get updated past that version and potentially break. It's one of those where the more popular the library, the more it'll be backwards compatible because it'll be maintained better. But yes, that's absolutely a risk, right? You have this external dependency. But again, you have the same thing with plugins, right? Like if the plugin vendor ups and leaves or does a breaking change in their code, it's the same kind of risk that you need to manage when you have dependencies. To some extent, the same thing may happen with inside FileMaker, right? Internally, FileMaker depends on some of these libraries already, like the insert from URL with curl depends on the curl library, right? There's other like things like OpenSSL. There's libraries that FileMaker uses internally as well, where we have to have the same concerns or at least thoughts about.
Right. All right, well, I think that does it. Unless there are any other questions. If not, we are going to move to our next presentation. Thanks again, Wim. Really appreciate it. We have several people from Claris here. We have Rosemary TG, who's going to be leading off, and then she's going to introduce Angie Wong and Connor Rock, also from Claris. So Rosemary, do you want to share your screen, or is one of you going to share your screen, or are you just going to present? Whatever it is, take it away.
Hey, well, nothing to present, and since we had planned for
Oh, are we a little early for you?
we're a little early, let me just jump over to Slack and see if people can jump on early. I know Doug is here early.
I'm very sorry to put you on the spot like that. While you're sorting that out, let's see if there are any announcements. Does anyone have anything to share with the group? We were talking before the meeting started a little bit about Engage, which obviously I'm sure you're interested in discussing as well, Rosemary. But anybody have any announcements they want to share? We were also talking about next month. Who did we say the shepherd is for next month? Is that Lynn? Is that you? And you're muted, Lynn.
Okay. Now you should be able to hear me.
Yep.
Yes, next month is me. So if you have any, right now we have Kevin Frank. I need to talk about some of his new features, including layout calculations. So yes, we're open for new content next month. And then somebody gets a pass in February.
We were discussing that before because of Engage, I think ends the day before our February meeting. We're most likely going to skip February, and there will be no FMDiSC meeting in February, and we'll resume in March, just like we used to do back in the days of in-person DEF CON.
But yes, I get to bring in the new year. Yay!
And speaking of Engage, we do have limited capacity, as I'm sure you've all heard, and we hope to see you. And we are at the point where we're more than 2/3 sold out. So if you are planning to attend, I highly recommend that you buy your ticket soon, because there may not be any tickets left in January. And no, Eric, there will not be campsites on the Apple campus. Yes, and if you haven't seen just a few additions and announcements about Engage, first, we will be running shuttles between the domain in Austin and the 2 Apple facilities that Engage will be at to make getting to and from much easier. So I know there was a lot of questions and concerns about, if all the many hundred people at Engage all needed to have rental cars to get back and forth, that would not be very good. So we have added shuttle service. And the second thing is, if you go to the site for Engage, about 3 weeks ago, we published the schedule, which now includes the keynote, the after party, and the planned Claris sessions. So you should be able to get a full look at what will be on offer at the conference. And I see that we have Doug and Connor who can talk about FileMaker 20.3, but I don't see Angie yet.
Well, should we switch the order then and start off talking about the new features, recent new features?
Sounds good. And we may just interrupt because I know Angie's fitting in between a couple meetings. So
Sure. However you want to do it.
all right. Well, I will let Doug and Connor take it away then.
Cool.
Welcome, guys.
Hey, hi everyone. Afternoon, everyone, or evening from New Europe. So my name is Doug Wallace. I'm a product manager on the Claris team, but essentially on the FileMaker side. And I've got Connor with me as well. He's the QA engineer, who's the kind of one of the geniuses that we have that basically goes through all the bugs that you submit and try to actually work with engineers to see how we can resolve them. I'm going to talk about FileMaker 20.3 in the latest update that we did recently, but I want to talk about some of the other stuff that we're working on inside of Claris, just to give you an idea of the positioning that we currently have at Claris around the FileMaker platform. That's pretty much FileMaker Connect and Studio. I'm going to share my screen, go through some sort of keynotes. Some of you have probably already seen that if you've been to Engage U. It's the same stuff we talked at Claris Engage in Japan a couple of weeks ago, and some of the elements that we share with other FileMaker user group around the planet, just to make sure that everyone is on the same. So essentially is what we've been working on the FileMaker side and Connect and Studio is to really sort of help developers and users, sorry, going too quick, to really able to actually sort of use the complete Claris platform as one, sorry, going the wrong way again with my keyboard, using the whole platform that we can actually give you and make use of all the great stuff that we've actually been building. And like what I'm saying is, even though FileMaker is really powerful, there's a lot of things you can do with it. In some cases, what we offer within FileMaker is not going to be able to actually work for your company. So essentially, FileMaker, what we know in terms of small and medium businesses or large or teams within large businesses, is essentially based the uses of operation apps. So your FileMaker runs a lot of the internal sort of systems, can be voice, and can be pretty much anything that's out there. And over the years, there's been requests basically on actually getting the apps to be made available for management to be able to actually see dashboards, or people from the outside to be able to actually see the dashboards. And on top of that, you're having to get access to different data sources to your FileMaker solution. So when we look at the way we have the type of users and where the data is stored inside of FileMaker, we essentially have what we call internal users, people that have been using FileMaker solution for a long time. They can use that through desktop, mobile browsers, web browsers, iPhone, iPads. And now currently there's already work being done on using data from AI inside of FileMaker. And so FileMaker is really good for that, to actually have that, whether you put it on a cloud environment, whether you use FileMaker Cloud, whether you use FileMaker server inside your company or outside, that's been really good for you for long term. The one area where it's been sort of a bit more of an issue for FileMaker is around external users. So we have FileMaker Web Direct, which is a great solution to actually have web-based FileMaker layout being shown to sort of users. But in terms of actually putting it together and installing it, it's kind of a lot of work. We've been working really hard to get up to 1,000 users on a Web Direct solution, but that means quite a bit of hardware, a lot of work to actually be done by the developer to actually sort of get that. And we know there is a need for that. We know there's a need for people to actually have easy solution where external users can actually go through a web browser, through mobile, or anything out there, access to your data. And on top of that, you have data sources coming from everywhere. It's getting really hard to actually have just everything in FileMaker. And so you need to actually have tools It's going to make your life a lot easier to get these external sources securely inside your FileMaker solution. And so this is why we basically have this sort of Claris platform and the way we actually sort of defining what it is. We have FileMaker Claris at the forefront of it. It's a great platform to build actually sort of great solutions. But there's a lot of stuff that FileMaker is not really good at. And that's why we basically now are leveraging Claris Connect, which is the platform that we use to do automation of workflows between API services, and Claris Connect, which is really good actually creating web apps really easily to be able to actually extend your internal data in FileMaker to external users kind of straightforward. So there was confusion before because we had a Claris Pro and a FileMaker Pro. That has been removed because we've been able to actually add the Claris ID code in terms of making sure we have proper secure environment inside the FileMaker to get that studio data. All of that is working properly now. So we've been able to actually remove the Claris Pro and Claris Server. And now within your Claris FileMaker solution, you can get direct data from Claris Connect or Studio. So what have we been working for the past 6 months essentially on the FileMaker side? When we released FileMaker 2023, we work on kind of various simple aspects on when we actually do an update. The upgrade that we give you, the update, has to actually have a lot of benefit for you. So what we work on is what we call immediate benefit for the end user. As soon as you install an update of FileMaker, you're going to get improvement. Whether it's going to be performance, stability, or reliability, you're going to get it straight away. So even though you might not need 1,000 web user connection to your environment, if you use WebDirect with the performance that we've done on the work by the engineers around WebDirect, it's more reliable, even if you have 50 to 100. So just by installing the update, you're going to see that your WebDirect solution are going to work better. And we fix a huge amount of bugs, whether they are based on the OS or they are related to the third-party tools that we use. That some of them get updated. We have to do a lot of fixes around them. So there's a lot of work done behind that. And every time we have an update, we want to bring new tools to the developer community so that they can do better apps and easier apps or easier management for the app. So we introduced scripted transactions back in the early version of 2023. There was a way for you to be able to do audit logging. There's a lot of tools that we've added just to make your life as a developer a lot easier. And we've improved quite a lot of the backend of the server sides, that in terms of automation, performance scripts on server with callbacks, all that great work that we've been giving it to you over the last couple of months. Recently, we did an update of 20.3, where again, we have those immediate benefit from installing it. In terms of the OS support for Mac OS Sonoma and iOS 17, iOS 17, sorry, we've done some great amount of work to be able to actually fix as much as the bugs that we can control out of the environment. We still know we have a few bugs that we try to actually sort of eliminate. There's a few bugs that actually are not really dependent on us, but more of Apple fixing some internal issues. And so we're hoping that we'll be able to actually sort of give you that quite quickly. We've been working as well on bringing sort of new features based on your feedbacks. One of those new features around HTTPS tunneling. And this is a request that essentially came from Japan originally, but there's been a request that we have for a lot of people in terms of how do I actually manage proxy servers and how do I actually sort of get the messaging across that FileMaker isn't such a weird tool. What we know is when you have a new customer and you want to install FileMaker server, there's always an issue with IT management for large organization. When you go into a conversation saying is, I need a port to be open in my system to get the FileMaker traffic to actually work. Like I've been saying is 30 years ago, if you had a port assigned to your platform, you were one of the big boys. It was really cool to be able to say, is, I've got a port for me. Nowadays, it's the opposite. Every IT department will go, well, actually, I want you to use HTTPS port 443 to get all the traffic inside that. I want you to actually use that system. And so what we did is inside of FileMaker server, we created a mini sort of extension of web server to allow the traffic of the FileMaker remote calls to go through HTTPS. Currently, this version is only available on Ubuntu 22 for Linux. It's a manual process. You have to enable it inside the FileMaker server on the admin console, and you have to manually enable it on the Mac and the Windows. So based on the feedback, we're going to do some work around it to make it easier for people to be able to actually implement it. Because being a manual process, if you have a lot of users, you have to tell them how manually they have to do the work on the Mac or the Windows. You can use the assisted install text file to do some automation, but it's going to basically be a lot of work for actually for you to get around that. So we're going to do some work to make it easier for you to be able to actually sort of use that. And on top of that is if you're using multiple servers, when you enable the options, if the other server doesn't use that new functionality, you won't be able to actually connect to it. So this is where we're doing some updates for the next updates. Other works we've done around is layout calculation. So layout calculation is a new feature we introduced in 20.2. We didn't do a lot of advertising around it. And essentially there was the reasoning behind it was we want people to get excited about it, but we want for people to understand that there's going to be work for them to get the layout calculation tool to work for them. Out of the box, it's not going to be a straight away. You have to redesign your layout. There's going to be a lot of work that you're going to have to go through to be able to actually leverage that. And on top of that, it works pretty much like a calculation, but because it is a text object, there's a lot of things that you won't be able to actually sort of do, or it's going to work differently from your calculation inside your table. So we've been able to actually fix some bugs with the 20.3 release. We've been able to actually allow you to use specific data types. There's going to be an evolution that we bring to the layout calculation tool. But for the feedback we're getting is people really like it. They see the benefit behind it, and they know that eventually they're going to be able to actually remove a lot of schemas that have in tables to make a better usage of that layout calculation field. We've done some work around loop scripting. So now you have the option to be able to flush the content pretty much whenever you want to. So again, this is a great addition. You're going to have to actually sort of test it out for your solution, but we're hoping that it's going to really help you be able to control a bit more and speed up basically some of the work you've been able to do. The last one that we had is we've brought the FileMaker Pro developer utilities to CLI. So we've had in Pro and Pro Advanced for a very long time developer utilities. We had a lot of requests from people saying can I get access to that to be able to actually do it through the CLI so that I could automate some of my flows. We've done that. We're going to work to do some documentation around it and make sure that it works exactly how you want to implement it. And so by the time by the time we get to engage, there's going to be some updates done to the tool. The last one is around platform integration. So like I was saying before is we have Claris FileMaker, we have Claris Studio, we have Claris Connect. We want all of that to actually work nicely together. So in terms of the flows from Connect, originally you had to use insert from URLs. There was a lot of work that you had to do in order just to get a bit of variable setup and to get the flow of data between FileMaker and Connect. You had to pretty much create between 15 and 20 steps, which is kind of a annoying thing. It could be done, but it basically takes a bit of time for you to actually go through it. So we created a new script step called Trigger Claris Connect Flow. It's a bit long wording, but basically it means what it said. We implement in recently, and then we did some updates with 20.3 so that it's easier for you to pick out the flows from either your teams or the flows you've actually created. And so there's less information that you have to send through. It just makes your life a lot easier. And we want to be able to actually get people to start using Connect a lot more because it's going to be able to fix some of the sort of issues that FileMaker could do, but used to take quite a long time to actually go through. And then the last one is around integrating studio tables directly inside the FileMaker. So if you have a FileMaker solution that's been working for you great, and you want to use Studio on the side and to be able to actually get a form and the data from the form inside the FileMaker, that's going to be quite straightforward for you to do. I'll do some demos afterwards to show you how that kind of work. Road ahead, pretty much the same stuff. PSR, performance, stability, reliability. That is the focus of the engineering team. Is we want to basically make sure your solution could work better, could be quicker, or the thing that you basically want to enjoy from the FileMaker side of it. AI, everyone's talking about it. We are doing some work, and I'll talk a bit more about later on how we're going to make it easier for you to integrate LLMs inside your solution. That can be already done in FileMaker using insight from URL. There's quite a bit of things you have to figure out in the background. So the idea is for us to help you really start using AI inside your solution in a nicer, easier way. and even more platform integration sort of support, where we're going to make Studio experience easier to use, and potentially with more of the views of Studio inside the FileMaker, and to get Connect to actually do a lot of the backend work in an easy way for you with your FileMaker apps. I'm going to touch up basically a bit on Connect. So Connect basically is, we introduced in April this year a free tier of Claris Connect. Pretty much the first time that we've actually given something free of charge, pretty much forever. The end date of your contract when you set up Claris Connect, the free tier is 2099. So by then, if you want to keep on using it, we'll figure out another way to give you a new contract. But the idea is, instead of actually giving you a time trial, we want you to give you a no feature restriction so that you can start playing with the tool. The only restriction is the API request you can have on a monthly basis, and that's limited to 500 APIs. So with that, it gives you enough to be able to actually start playing with it, to get an idea what you can do with it. Once you've actually come up and created your flows, once you've seen the benefit, then we can talk about the licensing behind it, and not on day one. We've added some new connectors. We added one for OpenAI, and we've been doing a lot of works on the UI, the UX, so that it's closer to what you have in the Studio environment and the Claris sort of the FileMaker Cloud, the Claris console environment. We're trying to get all of sort of look and feel inside all the web-based products from Claris to kind of look the same way. As you can see from the list, there's only one new connector. And so in order to get new connectors out of the door, we've created what we call the connector kit. So allowing developers to create their own custom connectors. Exactly what you can do with custom functions in FileMaker, you can now do the same stuff inside of Connect. The only thing that has to be learned is a bit of JSON, but once you get the hang of it, it's actually kind of straightforward to actually go through it. On our community side, the Claris Academy, we've created journeys to be able to learn the basics of Studio all the way down to the custom connectors. We now have 3 certificates around Connect. The last one was released about 10 days ago. And we've had some really good sort of numbers of actually people taking the certification and actually getting it a first time around. So we're really sort of happy about that. We've added some new connectors around pretty much all the feedback from users. So the first one is, there was a lot of demand to actually be able to use Azure AD in a nicer way. We keep the name Azure AD, even though now it's meant to be called Enter, but no one knows it's being called Enter. So we're just putting that name out there. And the last one on the list, I trust, is really from feedback from customers and legal requirement in Japan. So Japan is basically changing some of the way they're doing exchanging data around invoicing and quoting between customers and the company selling the product. You have to go through validation systems, and so we created this one, and it's actually picking up really nicely in Japan. Road ahead. So we're going to do improvements to make it easier in terms of the authentication of the custom connectors with various providers. We are working to actually increase the amount of custom connectors and connectors created by Claris inside our catalog. So we have a couple of already partners that actually created custom connectors that could be found on the marketplace. And we're going to try to make it easier for them to get access to those through the Claris Connect page. And again, working on making this sort of all user experience between Studio, FileMaker, and Connect to be seamless, to be easier for people to be able to actually use that. Last one, I'm going to go quickly on Claris Studio. Essentially, the last 18 months to 2 years, we've been building the blocks to get Studio off the ground. So it's a brand new technology. There's a lot of learnings for us at Claris, which is why sometimes people think it takes a bit too much time for us to produce new features or to get people their hands on it. But we are learning for what we're actually sort of building. We want to basically create something that is going to really help FileMaker to work in an environment that FileMaker has never been really that great. The external user. We don't want Studio to replace FileMaker. That's not the point of it. It's to be able to create a specific environment of use cases where we know FileMaker has issues. And essentially, it's around the web forms. How do I really quickly create a web forms in a space of minutes that I can share across the world, where my data is going to go back into my FileMaker solution, and then I'm going to be able to actually do mock around. So we have a system of doing updates. At the beginning, we were doing updates on a biweekly. Now it's a bit longer because a lot of it is actually around the back office, because we've been working on getting data centers across the world. So the first one that we had was US West Coast. We recently have one in Japan that's been enabled, and then we're working for one that's going to be released very soon in Europe. So we'll have basically the whole planet being able to actually use Studio properly. Feature of it is making it easier for people that have use cases of how they want to use Studio with a FileMaker solution come to life quickly, and for the developers to be able to actually set up really sort of in a nice way and be able to actually sort of that really quickly. So the more the work you're going to see when we talk about Studio in the months to come is about real world cases of how Studio is going to help you move forward, and to give you really the will to be able to start playing with it, especially because the partners have access to it, and then getting people that are really interested in Studio to be on the ETS will start being able to actually leverage that. Again, the use cases is really where we're going to be working on the Studio side to really be able to actually sort of give you things that you can actually use it for in the real world. So I'm going to do a quick demo of Studio to give you an idea of how we're kind of using Studio internally for our own benefit. The best thing it is when you actually know how to build your environment and how to use it, it makes it easier to actually sort of talk about that product to customers. So quick example basically is around getting submission of session for Claris Engage, one of the sessions where we just want basic information for people. You could create that really easily in FileMaker, do the layout, put in WebDirect, but you might not know how many users you actually have connected to the environment. So Studio is going to be ideal for that. You can basically just drag and drop your objects onto the layout. It's going to do everything. It's going to do the responsive design behind it. And pretty much that form is available across the world to any users without having to send username and password or lowering the security on your FileMaker server environment to get guest access to the environment. So this form is being filled in. Once you fill the information, you submit that. It basically gives you thank you. And then you are now able to get information back into your FileMaker solution. So currently is because of the way that the ESS press that we use in the background is automatic. You have to do a bit of scripting, but basically you'll be able to actually gather all the information back into your FileMaker solution and do all the work that you want to do out of that. How do we actually sort of do that in the background? Well, it's actually kind of straightforward. Inside the FileMaker now, you can actually have access to your Studio tables. And exactly when you've been able to actually have access to your ESS tables, it works the same way. We're not basically making it more complex for users to actually pick it out. It works the same way. And so that way you can have direct access to your Studio tables in your relation graph and do a lot of things that you want to do. The only difference you're going to see at first is not all the fields, data type that we have in FileMaker are exactly the same that we have in Studio and vice versa. Some of the new fields that we have in Studio are not really relatable for the time being inside of FileMaker. So we're working on that in the element to be able to get as much as what we have in Studio to look the same way and be able to actually work exactly the same way inside the FileMaker. But in terms of actually creating the relation graph between the two systems, it's going to be quite easy for you to actually do it. And we've been working on getting various views of how to actually present your data inside of Studio. So like dashboards, container views, timeline, pretty much everything you need out there. And one of the aspects that we know that basically a lot of people want to start using is like Kanban board, or being able to actually do backlog grooming, all that stuff. You can do it with a lot of system out there. But we do think that there's an advantage basically inside of using Studio is because you know FileMaker and there's going to be more things you're going to be able to actually do inside of FileMaker, you're going to be able to actually control a bit more how you want your Kanban boards or your backlog or environment, where normally you rely on companies that don't give you that much power. Through a mixing of Studio and Connect and FileMaker, you're going to be able to actually create pretty much exactly what you need. And so that takes me basically to AI. So we've been working, yeah.
Can I interrupt you before you get into AI? So we can introduce Angie, because she has to leave again at noon Pacific time.
Okay.
So Anyway, Angie, I don't know. I know you're here. Do you want to come off camera and say hello? So
Yeah.
Angie, for everyone who hasn't heard or hasn't seen, is our new head of community and learning at Claris. And if you're wondering where Janine went, she is still with Claris. She's just moved into a different role, doing business development around the Claris Connect use case in the K-12 market. So Angie, do you just want to say a few words and talk a little bit about who you are and what your vision is?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I hate to be that commercial that interrupts the very exciting AI story that was just about to unfold. But as Rosemary said, I do have a hard stop. So I just wanted to introduce myself really quickly. So you guys have a face to the name, and let you know that I will be working closely with Rosemary and the team and all of you to continue to advance our developer community. I'm very excited to be here. I'm based in the San Francisco Bay Area. I live in Belmont, if any of you know the area, and I go to the Sunnyvale office where the rest of the Claris crew are. And my background has been in training and enablement for a lot of large companies. My last company was at Atlassian, and before that I was at Workday and then some other companies. You can find my information on LinkedIn. But I'm really excited to be here working with Claris and look forward to getting to know a lot of you. I'm sure I'll see many of you at Engage in just a couple of months. And if you have any specific questions for me, I will try my best to answer them, but I'm only 2 months into the job, so I'm still very much going through my onboarding and drinking from the fire hose. So that's a little bit about me. Nice to meet all of you. Thank you, Douglas. Thank you, Rosemary.
Angie, just on behalf of the group, I wanted to say welcome. This is Jonathan. I'm coordinating this month's meeting.
Oh, great.
We were discussing before the meeting started that FMDiSC celebrated its 20th anniversary 4 years ago. So we're coming up on our 25th. So we're probably one of the longest running developer groups. And so, any way we can be a resource for you, or if you want to come back and present at any point or just discuss things with the group, just don't hesitate to let us know.
That's great. Wow, that is a very long-standing group, a lot of history there.
Yep, sure is.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for being champions of Claris products and FileMaker. It's awesome.
All right, thanks. It's very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. And I guess we'll hand it back to Douglas.
Thanks, Angie. Share my screen again. Cool. So let me talk about AI. So everyone's talking about it. It's the big thing that is going to change the world we live in. Every day there's new stories about AI and stuff like that. What I'm going to talk about is a bit sort of more for you as a developer of what we think at Claris we should be doing for you to actually make it easier for you to be able to actually leverage AI inside your Claris platform, and especially your FileMaker solution. So essentially, the first area where we're going to basically start using AI and talk about AI is around large language models. It's the idea basically of using artificial intelligence to be able to generate and answers based on your questions using human language. Really sort of the basic area of how we want to actually leverage that. So you ask the questions to the AI saying, whatever this information that I have, and it's going to basically give you an answer based on that. The impacts of LLMs is it's going to help you increase the power that you can actually bring to your solutions. We know basically Claris developers have a really good understanding of the business problems they're trying to solve. But in a lot of cases, there are problems that are really hard to be able to actually do just with the power of FileMaker on its own or with other systems out there. You kind of need something that's a bit more powerful and that runs on larger machine that's going to basically kind of help you figure out where you might have issue with the data, or enable to actually give even greater value to your customers. On top of that, AI currently that everyone's talking about is really sort of allow you developers to open new use cases. Thing that maybe 10 years ago, 5 years ago, or even 6 months ago, or a week ago, you thought you could do, but when you looked at doing it, it was going to take you a huge amount of time. And that's where AI is going to be able to actually help you. It's not going to replace you. It's not going to replace all the work. You're going to leverage basically the power that it has to be able to actually do those use cases quicker than before. And when you start using natural language inside your apps, the experience for the user is actually a lot better. This is a quote from one of our users that's been currently using AI inside their FileMaker application, where the ability for the end users to search has been more powerful using that natural language. One of the approach that we actually sort of putting it is we wanted to make it kind of straightforward for our developers to start using it when we actually bring it to the next version of FileMaker. So the best way to be able to actually do that is to use FileMaker scripts. You know, you live, you breathe FileMaker scripts, and you know how they work. You know exactly what you can do with them. So instead of us creating some new environment or making a lot of learning from you around it, we're just going to use FileMaker scripts and allow you to use essentially 6 FileMaker scripts to be able to actually interact with the LLM models. We're going to give you the flexibility to choose the right model for you. So we're not going to force you to go into using cloud-based LLMs and just the big ones. You'll have access to, at first, we'll give a easy entry to using OpenAI and Anthropics, but you'll be able to use local models. So if you want to set up your own environment with an LLM that you control, where no data actually goes out to the internet, you'll be able to actually do it. And there's some huge amount of resources on a lot of websites that tell you how to create an environment for LLM to be able to actually run. We'll supply even some Docker files when we launch it so that you could easily sort of set environment for yourself to actually play with. And then so that way, there is no restriction. It's on-premise, in your cloud, on every cloud out there. We're kind of basically giving the idea that it's kind of open for everyone. And we're going to offer support to help you navigate through this environment that's going to be quite new. How do I actually talk to a LLM engine? How do I actually ask it to actually do stuff for me? First, basically, is when you look at how we basically talk to the LLM, it's going to be straightforward. The saying is going to be 6 script steps, where essentially is the first one is you're going to log into your LLMs, and then you're going to basically do a prompt query. There's a way to be able to do semantic searching. We'll talk more when we get to engage, and there's going to be a lot of specific sessions around how you actually sort of talk to that. But essentially, if I look at the main actions script step that we're going to have inside the FileMaker, it's around LLM prompt. So you have an account name that you set up at the beginning. You're going to choose the model. You're going to choose the prompt. You're going to basically tell it where you want the answer to be kept. And you're going to be able to actually specifically tell it which table you want to use inside my system. So you're going to have quite a lot of freedom to be able to actually say, this is the table that I want you to look at. And this is the prompt that I have. And I want basically the AI to actually come up with the right information. This is where there's a bit of work that has to be done. The prompt team is essentially where the most amount of work will be done by the developer. So this is an example of a transcript of a meeting, whether it's on Zoom, whether it's on WebEx, where there's all the information inside that transcript, and you want the LLMs to be able to create action for you. And so you explain basically, and you tell it, hey, this is information that I'm giving you. This is all the things that I don't want you to process. I want you to give me an output of that with that type of information. And at first, when you ask the first couple of prompts, you're going to find that the AI might not give you exactly the right type of information you're thinking. So you're going to have to actually kind of work with it to be able to figure out exactly what you need to ask it so that it can give you this information back. We've been playing with it. This is a demo that Ronnie Rio sort of produced of a lot of cases, we want the end user to be able to actually create charts. And this example is saying is, well, we don't know what chart really the user wants. So we're going to create a lot of different charts in the background, and we're going to basically give the option for the end user to actually type in what they want to do. So the example in that case is using natural language, saying is, I want a pie chart, the total task by status. And then we send that information to open ChatGPT. It basically produces information, send it back. We use the power of FileMaker to create the charts out of that. But the next step you could actually get it to do is to just say is, the end user doesn't know what type of chart they want to do. They have an idea of the information they want to do. So a question could have been, give me the amount of companies in Texas that basically are doing such and such sales. And then you'll be able to actually sort of send information back. It will query your data and send you the information back. And then you can use FileMaker scripting to actually go right to the right information. So we'll make sure that quick find is powered by this new option, so that you could quite easily get your users to do any type of searching without having you to do all the stuff in the background. You'll just have to create the scripts to actually talk to the AI in order to do the work for you in the background. And like I was saying before, is in a lot of cases, we want to give you use cases of how AI and LLM is really going to help you change some of how you actually do a lot of the work. So while we were working on creating the keynote for Claris Engage Japan, Engage You, and pretty much all the developer groups meetings that we're doing currently, is we wanted to actually come up with a meaningful use case, and not something that would just come out of nothing, of something that's going to help us at Claris actually work better. And so Claris employees are based all around the US, all around the world. I live in Europe. I'm based in France. I've got colleagues in Japan. We spend a huge amount of time in WebEx, but a huge amount of times. And the biggest problem that we always do find inside of those meetings is we talk a lot, we ram on. So like all the PMs, everyone talks a lot. And then at the end of the meeting, in a lot of cases, you have to actually stop, take notes, go into your Kanban board, create some of the tasks around it. And that takes a bit of time. And so we thought, how about we create a demo where all of that work that we have to do on the side, we get all of the tools, FileMaker, Connect, and Studio, to work together and allow us to be able to create the events for us directly. So we have our Kanban board where we have all the backlog items. You can move them around. And the idea behind it is to go as well, we have meetings that are actually recorded. So everything we do is recorded, and afterwards we have a transcript. And from the transcript, we could use the LLMs to create the actions to populate our Kanban board without us to actually having to do it manually. So the example is basically there's 4 or 5 of us. We have a meeting. We have that meeting recorded. The example that we use is Zoom because we're going to use Connect. We talk about all the work that we have to do. And once the work has been done, that transcript is going to be created by Zoom. It's going to tell Slack that, hey, the meeting has been finished. It's been transcribed into text that goes into a FileMaker field. From FileMaker field, we use the script to send the information to the LLM. It's going to basically create action items, and it's going to put everything into our board. So meeting's done. Then we go back into our FileMaker app where we manage submission for speakers. Connect tells us that there's been new action based on the meeting that we just had, and it's going to create the events for us straight away into our systems. We're going to be able to actually view them inside FileMaker if we want to, but because the Kanban board view in Studio is really cool, we'll have all information, and then we just need to actually categorize it afterwards. So the extra work that used to take us quite a bit of time now could actually be fixed quite quickly using all of that. So I'm going to go a bit more details of how we actually sort of created that. So initially, we have that Zoom meeting. We record it. We could use the companion at the bottom just to see information, but we're just going to wait for the transcript to actually be done. Once the meeting is done, Zoom is going to basically create a transcript of it. Once that's done, we're going to get Connect to grab the script, tell Slack that it's been done properly. We're going to insert that information into our FileMaker solution, and then our script in FileMaker, I'm going to talk to the LLMs to be able to generate the action items. And so we were working on that, and we had the original sort of VTT file from Zoom inside the FileMaker field. And then we get it to actually say, okay, process the LLMs and then create information for me. But while we were doing it, we realized that the Zoom engine to actually do the transcription wasn't that great. So in the meetings, we have Andy Kate, Andrew, and while we were doing all sort of those examples, there was one thing we did realize, that the Zoom AI wasn't, because it was meant to be really quick, there was one word it could never pick out properly. It was Andrew. And it didn't matter whether it was my accent, Robert, Ronnie, every time it was coming up as Android. And there's no Android in Claris. Well, we don't do a Claris version of FileMaker Go for Android. So we're like, it's a bit of a pain. And so we used basically GPT version 4 to be able to actually process that. Because it's more powerful, it figured out that amongst the participants, there was someone called Andrew Lecates. So it knew that basically that word Android, which was kind of weird, actually was Andrew. And once we had that, it got easier for it afterwards to be able to actually create action items. So we had the first basically problem solved. And then the next one is to get the LLM to understand that it has to extract action items and create them properly. So we send a chunk of data at a time, just to figure out whether they can do it so that it doesn't take that much time. And eventually the LLM, the AI, kind of comes up with information. And we've told it, I want everything back into a JSON format. This is the format that I want, action description, assignee, assigned by, and you go through the system. And the system is basically going to create a few. There's going to be errors. And it's kind of nice because the LLM is going to give you a lot of time, the error, what doesn't work and stuff like that. So it's kind of useful to be able to actually sort of figure out. So I'm going to run the video run through, and at the end, you'll see a couple of errors coming back from OpenAI on the reason why some of the work isn't really working properly. And so we're getting all this information back, and because it's JSON and we know how to use JSON through script steps in FileMaker, we're just going to create entries inside our studio tables that I can actually get access to from FileMaker. So really straightforward. Once I've got all my action, I'm going to basically just create the action. So it's having issues towards the end in terms of the amount of data that we send out. So we bring it down and we basically see that in terms of tokens, there's going to be a limit. So we work on it and we see what we can do. So at the end, I've got all my action items created. You can see the list, and I'm going to send them to Studio. So I'm just going to script. Basically, it's going to create all the entries inside my Studio tables. And then basically, I can do everything in my Canva inside of Studio. That video you're seeing is something we're going to release in the future, where you're going to be able to actually kind of like where you do your forms, your layouts inside of FileMaker, you'll be able to actually have buttons that do specific stuff. One of the examples basically is to be able to create a solution in Studio where you have, you can have your backlog, but when you have your home button, it's going to take you to a dashboard, especially for you, where it's going to show you all the tasks that you have to do, all the tasks from the team. It's going to be able to actually give you a dashboard, really straightforward stuff that you could create inside of FileMaker, but sometimes actually take a bit of time. You just want to be kind of straightforward and easy to use. And that's where you'll be able to actually enjoy the power of the Claris platform. And so this is basically the angle that we're working on. Is we really trying to actually build incredible stuff. And we know that developers already really good at doing a lot of stuff in FileMaker. But where we know that we have limits inside the FileMaker, that's where we want to leverage Studio, and that's where we want to leverage Connect to help you make even better application around. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And if you have any questions, you can go ahead. I'm just going to go quickly through the chat just to see if there are any questions. I think I saw it early on. Yes, so we are around. The question is, can you use a web viewer in FileMaker layout to show timeline in Studio? We're working on that. We are trying to figure out exactly how we can do it. We are working on how we actually manage the length of the token and how everything works in the background. But there's work being done to see how we can actually leverage that as quickly as possible. So last year I did some sort of demo showing to sort of at user groups the full view of Studio inside the FileMaker. But the next step is to be able to leverage small views of Studio inside the FileMaker where your data is stored inside the FileMaker. So you got any questions? You got Connor, who basically knows pretty much everything there is to know about FileMaker.
Well, certainly not everything, but happy to discuss anything, especially around like 20.3 features that Doug mentioned.
Everyone too shy?
I know there's been a lot of interest in the layout calculations and that there were revisions in 20.3. You want to just touch briefly on what changed in the latest update?
For 20.3 regarding layout calculations,
I believe there was something in terms of how you reference fields, like a full field reference, but I just saw something about that in passing.
Hey, Jonathan, if I can piggyback on that real quick. One of the slides said that you're going to have to re-architect solutions to make use of layout calculations. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that.
So out of the box basically is so let's say you have you've created a calculation field to show a label inside your solution. You've actually stored that information inside your table, and you've got a calculation inside your table. In order to actually leverage that, you're going to have to actually copy the text from that calculation and then put it in the layout calculation tool inside the FileMaker, and then put that object inside your layout with the text so that it can actually sort of be rendered. And so there's going to be a bit of work to remove or to take basically the calculation from a field and put it into that tool.
That makes sense. Certainly an opportunity to clean up a lot of schema that maybe was really just for presentation and now can be handled just at the presentation layer and doesn't need to be a field anymore.
And just to sort of dumb that down a little bit for, I haven't played with the newest version of FileMaker yet. Is this sort of akin to if you're using misusing a button bar to display a calculated value? When you say put it into the layout calculation tool, is that akin to a button bar being a tool?
People were actually using button bar in a lot of cases to actually fill in the gap because layout calculation didn't exist. So you create your button bar with maybe just one segment, and you would actually enter the calculation inside that to display the text how you wanted to. The idea is to, I wouldn't say replace completely button, but it's to say button bars is there for a specific reason. It's there to actually have buttons when you click on it with icons, with text and stuff like that. Layout calculation is to really sort of remove a hurdle that had been there for a long time. It just happened that whilst we were trying to fix some issues around the merge field, one of the engineers started today saying, "Oh, by the way, I can do that." And we went, "Well, okay, let's try it and see how it's basically worked on." So I know that in community, we have people that really get super excited about this feature, saying this is the best stuff you've ever done, and finally you've done it. I know people are saying, well, the button bars does it for me, so am I going to change everything? Probably not. But at least it's a nice way for us to be able to actually go is we want to make your life as a developer a lot easier. We want to sort of remove those hurdles where you had to do some hacks. I don't like the word of hacks, but basically going around it without using some of the things that we should have actually put out a long time ago. And you'll see over the next years and even sort of next 18 months, there's a lot of work that we're doing of removing basically those hurdles so that you don't actually have to figure out a way around it. We create the tool that makes it easier for you to leverage whatever it might be, whether it's the add-ons, whether it's anything around that.
Yes. Hey, Steve.
Thank you.
Yeah, Steve, I wanted to say it. To put it back into, because you've not seen it, it is a new layout object. And so when you pull down in the menu, you know, the formatting menu and all that, it pulls down and says layout calculation. And it becomes a block of text, just like a layout text that you put on there with merged fields or not merged fields. However, there's a special little symbol that shows up and shows I want you to calculate this piece of the block. So it can use the field references, it can use, 2 + 3 equal, and it'll actually calculate it. It evaluates that text wherever that little symbol is and that calculation as a part of that text block. Does that help at all?
Absolutely, yeah. It
Okay.
sounds like when I saw it's going to require re-architecting of solutions, I thought, oh no, what's going on? But this actually sounds like it's right in line with what I was already thinking. So, and the way I was already thinking. So
Yeah.
fantastic. Yeah.
This means that you don't have to specifically create calculations. It's not a field. You're not changing your schema. You're just adding a block to the layout itself, and it gets evaluated when you go to the next record if it's different information. So it's like the merge field in that it updates, but it's a calculation which can be dynamic based on whatever we calculate. So
yeah, it sounds like the intersection of merge field and misused button bar and global.
Yeah. I think you'll like it.
Cool. Very cool. Thanks. Yeah.
And Kevin Frank has a couple of blog posts about it. And I think, Lynn, you mentioned that Kevin's going to be presenting next month. So I don't know if that's on the list. Of
course, Kevin does.
Of course he does. So anyhow, so stay tuned.
Next month.
Yep. Come back for more.
Awesome.
All right. I think we're pretty much at time, unless there are any last questions for the team from Claris.
Well, you had requested just a quick summary of the changes in 20.3 regarding layout calculations. It's mostly 2 bug fixes, just that you no longer have to spell out fully qualified names for field references, and also that if the calculation fails to evaluate, it's not going to display the calculation formula anymore in browse. But we do have more planned for improvements on this feature. Saw requests in chat for making them actual objects in the XML output. So we're trying to listen to all that and continue to improve it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you guys very much for coming and presenting to us. It's great to see the amount of work that's going into FileMaker and all the new features that are being added. So keep up the good work, and thanks for coming and presenting to us.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Thanks. And next up, our last presenter is Albert Harum-Alvarez, who many of you know has been a member of the FileMaker community for a long, long time. He has given over the years a design masterclass, which I've had the good fortune to attend twice, actually, and certainly learned a lot from Albert in those classes. And one of the things, as I've kept up with Albert and paid attention to what he's doing over the years, is that he keeps evolving the ideas and the concepts in the class. And so today he's here to share a couple of the design rules that he's been developing, and especially the ones that he thinks are the most relevant for FileMaker developers. So Albert, I'll hand it over to you. You should be able to, there's your screen, and take it away.
Maybe unmute.
I think I have, but hold on a second.
There you are.
I have a backup connection here and I'm muting that. So, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
To coin a phrase. Hey, welcome, guys. Great to be part of this auspicious day, full of great stuff. And I find it interesting that I've been able to follow on Wim and on Douglas, because there's some overlap, actually. So Douglas spoke about You can now take things that maybe never should have been in schema in the first place and put them into a layout calculation. And Wim spoke about how to support microservices. And, when that kind of evolution happens, that is definitely moving from Monolith to something that has more distinct parts to it. And Wim very humbly said that, it's just his opinion. And of course, we all know that that's not true, that it's great to hear anything that Wim has to say about FileMaker. But what we've been able to do with the Smallco team and the design rules is to find those cases when there is actually a specific process that happens over and over again through the history of design, through the history of a shelter in which you first would throw a skin over some mammoth bones and hide under it, and then eventually throw a couple more skins so it would be kind of a little bit of a better roof. And after some time, you may have a thatched roof that has many thousands of distinct elements to it. That kind of pattern of enfolding is something that happens over and over again. It's like people talk about the difference between history and myth. And they say, well, history is something that actually did happen once. And myth is something that has always happened, is happening now, and will never stop happening. And that's the kind of design rules that we've been not so much authoring as uncovering. And I thank Susan Allred-Prosser for her help with this. And I think it's kind of amazing that she was there for my first design masterclass in Phoenix with FMP training, and she was able to help with these rules. By this time, this kind of design work is definitely something that is helpful, because as you look at your choices at any one moment, what should I do next with this app? How shall I take it from a relatively brittle monolith towards something that is more serviceable, more dependable? Well, it turns out that there are some rules that you can follow. And so in this case, cap thatch is the rule that says that early on you do build single ply. Now, when you build something single ply, that one has to be relatively strong, right? But then as the work ages, it often folds and folds again. So you get layers that are thinner and multiplied. Think of how security worked from a single login to multi-factor authentication towards, where we're going, where you are continuously authenticated. Or a digital camera that took a single photo and now takes many, many photos, right? This is a layering. This is one of the processes that we identify. The talk that I gave in Rome, 5 FileMaker flaws, focused on a couple of these patterns and how they apply to the evolving FileMaker Claris platform. And I'd like to present this to you now. First of all, once again, thanks to the whole team that helped produce this, my wonderful Smallco team, and especially thanks to Rosalind Martir, front and center here, for this work. Hoping to bring the Design Masterclass to a city near you soon. We had some discussions of doing it in Austin, but my daughter is getting married very soon. I'm a little bit busy with that, so don't know if I'll see you in Austin, but I hope to see you soon. And if you'd like us to do the class for you and for your particular team, that's a great way to do it, and I've done it for many of the FileMaker partners. A bit about the rules first. I'll let this guy talk. Is that audio coming through?
No audio.
No audio.
Okay, I'll skip it. Okay, so let me just briefly describe that what you would see in that video is the fact that the rules here are something that you can use to model your next steps and how to get out of the situation you may be in at the moment. When you're in a bind, you can look at the rules to see what they say. And specifically, I'd like to give you that kind of way out for 4 of these 5, going very quickly. And I am glad to announce that if you're able to stick around, I think we still have Lynn Allen with us on the call. And Lynn had a solution that she was going to share, in which she has a solution to what I list as my number 1 FileMaker flaw, which is the DBA's top nav. Hello, Lynn, you're still there?
Hi, Albert.
Let me try and move very quickly through these. Are you able to stick around for a while?
Absolutely.
Wonderful, great. All right, we'll continue here. So, do you know what I'm talking about even before I go forward? I wonder if anyone does. Do you know this kind of top nav? It wasn't even a button bar back in the day. It was a row of buttons across the top that basically recapitulated your schema. Your main data tables were all up there. But didn't that make sense back in the day? I love what I saw on Douglas's slide. I love what what Claris is doing to say that this platform is your business operating system. That's a good name, and that's a great, very aspirational, and I think it really works. Of course, that's not what we used to design. We used to design FileMaker databases. So of course, at the very top, you'd have a list of data tables. That made all kind of sense, right? To do that kind of thing. So it starts with what are the things that you want to see rather than who are you and what do you want to do? That's good for a database, but usually you evolve away from that. And the rule that's followed when that happens is called warehouse to workbench. Sort by type eventually gives away to sort by task. Types are a you thing as a database person or as a designer. Tasks are for us, the people you're designing for. So look, if you were in grandma's house, you would note that what she's got here is the pan she uses most, the closest, right? Forgive me, a cat has come in the house, but Dominic has the situation in hand. Okay, she's got her most common utensils. She's got her spices up here. But if you were to go to her grocery store or go to the local Target, you would see that there would be an aisle with all of the pots and pans. And there might be another aisle nearby with the groceries where you could get the rice and the flour and whatever else you might need, right? The store is set up as a warehouse, which is appropriate. Her kitchen is set up as a workbench. Let's move this to the domain of tools, right? Because workbench is a tool kind of thing. And we're building tools for business, right? So I think it's more appropriate for us to cast it this way. When you go to the Home Depot, or for our folks in Europe, if you go to the Bauhaus, right? The big box place that sells hardware and stuff like that, you're going to have aisles that will have your Makita and Milwaukee and Bosch and DeWalt drivers, let's say, and drills. And then an aisle over might be all the fasteners, which is the nails, the screws, the staples, whatever they might be. That's appropriate for those stores for them to be that way. But once you get back to the work site, once you're back to your workbench, you actually want to have your screws next to the driver and your nails near the hammer. So we're no longer sorting by type, we're sorting by task. One of the things that I have seen in my many years of looking at FileMaker databases is that there is a lingering focus on sorting by type that actually gets in the way of folks getting their work done, because things need to be sorted instead by task. Let's take an example of what we might be speaking about. Now, this airline ticket is really a great example of legacy data. because if you remember back many years, the layout of this boarding pass has not changed at all. It's very much legacy. It's very deep in the stack of elements that are present within the world, the digital data world of airline flights. This, in the words of Stuart Brand, his book about how buildings learn. He has this list of 7 layers, and it starts with site and structure, and it ends with skin. And he points out that, of course, skin is the thing that changes the most, that can molt and shed and change constantly. But the site and the structure of a building change a lot less. This is very, very deep structurally. And of course, even though Norse Airlines has made a real splash in providing low-cost tickets, it's got a nice logo, they can't change this ticket. They've got to go along for the ride and what this thing looks like. So the result is something that is, it's maybe not quite as readable as it could be. It's basically kind of a place to put a whole bunch of data. It was developed in the early days of airline flight, and it hasn't changed. So here today is a picture of a screen from a Tesla with what we would call the preference settings, right? If you look at a setup of a Volvo, current Volvo, or if you look at a setup of a current Hyundai or many other vehicles, you will have something that puts me in the mind of those massive old Word preference panels that were so deeply nested that they had like stacks of tabs, maybe 3 stacks. Remember those? And so they're just like, okay, this is where we're going to put all these choices. So let me tell you a little bit of story about how this can go wrong. So I'm sitting in my Volvo XC90, and I'm noticing that, you know, when I memorize the settings for me sitting inside the car and press that button, my seat adjusts upward. It's so nice, really. It's so convenient that happens. And then I go down the road and I notice that the mirrors are still set for my daughter, who is a wonderful young lady and has a lot of things that recommend her, but she is a lot shorter than I am. And her seat is a lot closer. So basically the outside mirrors are useless for me in that moment. And of course, I don't notice until the moment that I need the outside mirrors. So what the Volvo designers very helplessly, there's a Freudian slip. What they did is they said, well, let's give people the choice of decoupling the adjustment of the mirrors from the adjustment of the seat. For those cases when perhaps I want to put my body in the seat, but put my daughter's head in there, it's totally not preferences. And it's part of what actually part and parcel designing for warehouse rather than workbench. You end up providing to users options that in their combination have impossibilities, have moments that are completely useless, that really do not work, right? And so as you change your approach to this, what has happened in Microsoft Word is, I mean, Word has an awful lot of settings even today. But what happens is that there are fewer things that are set at the moment that you say, well, you know, I want to visit a preference panel. And there are more things that are set when the computer sees that it's you. Right? And so that's focusing on who you are, what your role is, and what the task is. Right? So the suggestion in this case is that what you can often do when you realize, you know, it's looking a little bit long in the tooth in my FileMaker solution with all of those buttons across the top with all of those tables. What can I do instead? Well, rather than showing them all the data, help them work. So what I've asked people to consider is that when you are asking someone to log in to your solution, you are not just going to decide what you are preventing them from doing. You're going to figure out what you want to let them do and even promote them doing. And that given the way, the narrative of where our apps work, you're less likely to want to jump up to some hierarchical level and navigate to another table as simply to go from one data point to a related point directly without the detour up to the bar at the top. Does that make sense? I hope so. Please go. I'm not checking the chat now. Welcome your comments. This will be a little bit clearer as I go a little bit farther down the line into FileMaker flaw number 2, label heaviness. Now, once again, back when FileMaker made databases, how can you criticize a database for being label heavy? I mean, that's what a database is supposed to be. It's supposed to say, here's the data and which field is this? So you go ahead and you put the name of the field, right? So you would have a list or a table where at the top of each of the list or table, you have your field names. I'd ask you to consider that for a user who knows this system and they see that I'm talking about a 90-inch fire door frame that's 14 gauge for furnace mechanical rooms, that they have no problem computing that this is actually 5 data points that have been rolled into a snowball that makes sense. It packs, right? And they don't need to have those 5 data points. By the way, there are 2, fire door and then frame are 2 data points, right? So 5 of them all together without labels actually works just fine if you assemble them in an order that makes sense within the narrative, right? So what we're doing here is we're saying that these data points that we're showing actually represent entities that have a life of their own. That door frame, well, it needs to get installed in the Cleveland Clinic, right? It needs to be on that mechanical room at the end of the hall on the 3rd floor, and it's going to do a job, right? So if we pay attention to that narrative, we then design in a way that makes sense to the installer. Because the last thing an installer of a door wants to see is a whole bunch of list of data points, because what they have in front of them, a door installer, is a whole bunch of parts. Installing a door is parts heavy, right? So they want to see something that allows them to roll up what they're doing into a single narrative, a single story. And we can do that often finding a way to pack together data points to tell a story. How could it work here, for instance? Now, you know, this is a boarding pass. There are 2 groups that use this, 2 roles. One is, let's say this guy, Albert, he flies occasionally, right? So he sees these things and he has the kind of job that he needs to do as a passenger on this plane. And then there's another role, someone who may see many, many of these every day. And that would be the gate staff, right? So among those 2 roles, let's pick one. Let's not design for 2, right? Let's say this is mainly for this guy, Albert. So how does he look at this information? Right now, here I have my labels. Look, from, to, gate, group, seat, boarding. I mean, there's plenty of data there. This is the departure time. I'm covering a label with my thumb, forgive me. But this arrangement is what we call in the Design Master class, dry snow. And of course, you know, as any Miami boy knows, dry snow does not pack into a snowball, right? Just kind of falls apart. And that's what happens with this data. It doesn't roll up, it doesn't pack. So how could we make it pack? What could we do to make that work better? Well, let's say we understand what it is that Albert wants to do. He gets confused enough flying, so it better be clear for him. He's been known to leave his jacket, leave his passport, you know, go to the airport on the wrong day. So God help Albert. He needs all the help he can get. So, okay, this is my flight from Miami to London Gatwick. It's a good starting point. Okay, then what do I need to know? Okay, well, I have to be at gate F16 and I have to buy the boarding time. Now notice that most of the time, even here, it's the departure time that is listed to the left, which means more prominent than the data to the right. That's not what the story. Okay, the story is if Albert waits till this time, he misses his flight, right? So where do I need to be? Gate F16, board this time. And then after that, what seat do I need to sit in? Okay, I'm there by this time. By putting these 6 data points in this arrangement, I've now told a narrative. It rolls up. Can you see how it packs like a snowball, right? So understand this. There is no way that Norse Airlines or any other individual airlines is going to convince the large system to change all the boarding passes, which is why you can think of airline boarding passes as the equivalent of ransom notes in terms of design. They will not improve. But if they were, this is the way it would go. Well, there we go. All right. So when approaching label heaviness, what we're doing is to say, don't name data points. That's appropriate for a database. But now that we are designing business operating systems, tell stories. Now, this is one that may be the first truly fair criticism of the FileMaker app itself, because the other two were part and parcel of the fact that we are building databases. But you all know that if you build a list or a portal or any collection of data, by default, you're going to get the oldest record ever, and you have to take another step to make sure that you are at the bottom of the list, let's say, right? And we all know that that's something that can be done. And this is a relatively easy fix, so you don't end up looking at the absolute oldest data from a long, long time ago. So show all records, that particular step gets scared in the design masterclass because it knows it's going to catch some grief. Very seldom do you want to show all records. Right? If you're scrolling to the end, then you're seeing new stuff, and you're scrolling to the end, you do not want to fetch all records, right? So be timely. Last, because I'm not going to go to 5 today. This may be the single most important one for design of interaction. Okay, so let's just take a moment with this one and point out that in the world of human spoken languages, there are typically 2 orders that are found almost half and half. Half the world's languages do what English does, and they say something like buy food, which is verb, object, right? And more or less the other half do what Hindi does and say kana kharid, which is food buy. However, if you go to the world of sign languages around the world, nearly everyone uses food buy. Why? Well, take a second to consider that command line interfaces, be they Unix or DOS, have the format of buy food. Partly because they're modeled on English, right? You say DEL, delete, and then you put what you're going to delete. But the fact is, if you start with the object, you can more quickly narrow the choices. And this is very, very important for clarity in an interface. If I'm going to allow you to say any old action that you want, that's a lot of actions. But if I start with food, there's only certain things you're going to do with food. I mean, you can buy it, you could eat it, right? You could throw it, right? It narrows your choices a lot faster. And there's something else very important about it, that in the real world, it's much easier to understand when you have the object first and then you do the action. So look, I'm not going to speak any particular sign language, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the sign of something, and then I'm going to do an action on it of moving it, right? That's natural. Object and then verb of the action. And let's see what this can mean for us. If you even look at this particular interface here, which has the standard new format for the Google apps, this pane is the utterance by food. And so, look, here is this utterance, this phrase. Oh, look, I can listen to it. Oh, look, I can record it. I can close it. So this syntax here is object, action, right? It's object and then verb, right? The domains of action are done in that way. You usually see in the Google Apps 3 dots like a vertically oriented ellipsis. It follows this rule, right? So let's see how this can look out in the world and why it can be a problem. Just to understand how powerful this notion of object action is, look at what happened when Edison began to sell this product of electric lights. The sign says, this room is equipped with Edison electric light. Do not attempt to light. In other words, don't attempt to light the light bulb with a match. Okay, that won't work. It's not going to work. But the instinct to do that was so strong that these signs had to be mounted everywhere. And what it does do, and here the tell is this word simply. Whenever you see that word simply, it means that something is actually not simple and it's kind of confounding. So we're going to put the word simply there. Simply turn the key on the wall by the door. And grandma goes, turn a key. Keys for opening a door. You know, they use the idea of a key, familiar, more familiar than a switch, but it was on the wall by the door. And that is at a distance. It's an action at a distance. That was difficult, right? So let's see how this can work today when you're checking out at Target. This is my Dominic. And oops, no, I have to click here. No, it's not going to go. Oh, man. Okay, sorry, I can't play you that video either. So, of course, what he does is he takes the pencils and he scans them. And he can orient them so that this scanner works or this scanner works. It's what the Mac OS used to call forgiveness, in this kind of a strange turn of phrase. He
I can't hear you.
Yeah, Albert, we seem to have lost.
If you go to the Whole Foods, which is right next door, at that moment, I'm going to turn my, hold on, I'm going to turn my video off, guys. Let me know if you sense a problem with the transmission.
We were sensing a problem with, Albert, can you hear me?
Yes.
We were not hearing you after you were talking about forgiveness there for a moment.
Okay, we go back just for a moment, see if it's better now.
Mm-hmm.
No, hold on. Okay, hold on. Okay, so what I said here is that Dominic takes the pencils, which is the object he wants to act upon. He is the agent, right? And he takes that and he scans it, and therefore he buys it. So it's object and then action. This is the thing that is intuitive enough and makes sense that it's the way all sign languages around the world work. In sign language, it's called agent, object, action as the syntax, right? Now, let's go to two other examples. here in the world of the Whole Foods next door, you can touch over here to start if you want to be led through the situation, and then it will tell you what to do, right? And then if you are in the Tesco at that London Gatwick airport, and you have been trained by your experience with Target and Home Depot and Whole Foods, and you go up and you try to just scan, nothing happens. Because this system has been built to require you to tap a button called self-service first. It's pretty idiotic because it's over there in the Tesco, they can have like 15 of these self-service stations, and there's no one around to help you. So it's pretty clearly self-service, but you cannot just start scanning. You must first do verb and then deal with the object. So it breaks the rule of syntax very clearly. So you may have encountered this. Culturally, this does happen in different parts of the world that have a more of a controlling attitude towards interfaces. And note, interestingly enough, that this does happen. There is an amazing cultural fight between how it works to fly an Airbus or how you fly a Boeing jet. So if we thought that it was all over with the fight between Macintosh and Windows, no, this pattern has happened over and over again, and it actually happens with checkout as well. So what we learned is that you have to support this verb object syntax, which means in the world of FileMaker, when you create a button, if your first tendency is to put a verb on that button, then there's a very high likelihood that you may be instituting your syntax backwards. It's much better for you to click on or right next to the object that you're acting upon, and then choose from a set of actions, similar to the way it works in the world of the Google apps. So the one that I'm not going to get to, but which is very, very interesting, is the one that in many ways Wim very thoroughly addressed, and Douglas and the whole team at Claris is addressing like crazy. And that is making sure that FileMaker apps no longer need to sprawl all over the place. And I think this is the one large message that I want to share and have been sharing around the FileMaker world for a number of years now, that to the extent to which you can take your FileMaker app and do a strategic retreat, which means consciously decide that your app is going to do less. Retreat to that aspect of your customer's business, which is most business critical and most mission critical. Those will be the aspects that are going to be the least likely to already be dealt with a commodified app that you can get for a couple bucks a month. Does that make sense? So when you do that strategic retreat, you are then at the most defensible and most important part of their business world. So more on that in the class. What I'd like to do is to see if we could take a look at Lynn's solution, which is the way that she solved number one in my presentation. So for that, Lynn, do you want to share your screen?
Okay, if you'll bear with me. Let me get the app up.
While you're doing that, I just want to say that what we're going to see here with Lynn Ample is a place where she saw what was happening with that top nav and then took a very different approach. And I just imagine, I can tell you that when you're facing a redesign like this, understanding that that top nav may repeat across many, many layouts it's a little bit of an intimidating thing to even think that you want to take on the scope of that change. But I think you're going to see, when you see what Lynn did, is that it was more than worth the effort in terms of clarifying the interface and making it centered upon role, on actions rather than data.
Yeah, what we're looking at is a solution that is for to the industry provider to interior designers so they manage their whole workflow from orders through to invoices on this. And I am the fourth developer on this one, so I'm not going to take responsibility. But rather than a series of buttons, what they use is a series of tabs across almost all of their layouts. So every time you go to a tab, it's essentially a button, okay? They also have buttons across the top here, depending on what screen you're on. Can you see the far right-hand side? They have a series of search fields and then individual buttons to go to different entities over there as well. And then they have cute things like, well, I can go to a different home screen if I'm the manager, blah, blah, blah. So what I've replaced this with, are we ready, or do we want to talk about this more, Albert?
No, I think it's great to just kind of see the difference right off the bat and then jump back in.
Okay, so basically I do have buttons, but these are functional buttons. They get them to places where they have huge numbers of portals on the other screen. Let me show you a different, this is a more functional home screen layout for the people who take orders in their showroom.
So if we just take a moment, the people who take orders in the showroom, this is a particular role.
Right.
And so the number of choices narrows a great deal when you're dealing with a role like that.
This is their old screen in the showroom. All right. And this is their new screen in the showroom, where they can do the particular functions they do most frequently, just by, and they can search for things, they can go to a website for this part. So when they're talking on the phone with customers, they have instant access. In the old one, they actually have to go to their inventory system or inventory screen and look it up. So I'm trying to localize everything into one screen so they don't have to go anywhere. If they do, we have progressive disclosure. They can do their search and direct to other areas through a menu button, or they have an actual functionality where they say, I want to see all the, the invoices or the quotes, they're open quotes right now, okay? And it'll get them right to a list. But so I've tried to make and that didn't work, did it? As you can see, this is still in progress. I've tried to make it. Is there a
default? What's the default for a person who is internal taking orders when they log in? What will they see?
The showroom
tomorrow when they get
Monday,
right.
This showroom. Right now it's the old one. This is what they're intended to see when they log in.
What will the data be? It says checked in 12/8. So will they by default see the items that have been checked in today?
These are people who check in. Okay, so these are visitors to their, so what they see is the client's names. If they have samples out, they can immediately make a work order for that person, or they can check more samples out for them. So I'm trying to localize this all onto one screen when they're performing their tasks. So they don't have to go to the client screen if they don't want to. They don't have to go to the samples to search out their samples. They can get it right from there. Okay, and they can manipulate those samples right from there. Either check them in or out, or give them an extension of 7 days on them or whatever they want to do. So when they're working with this, and they have to do, is if they have, things they need to do, it will show there. So that if Debbie logged in, this is what she would see.
Oh, so at this point, let's say it's September 5th, because this may be a great way to really understand what you're proposing to do in the future. If this is September 5th, right?
Right.
And you are Debbie, then you're going to see this when you come in.
Right.
Right. So this notion of knowing who it is and providing to them those elements that are already there. So rather than thinking of all clients, I have the clients I most likely want to see. I click directly to them rather than all samples. I see the ones that are most likely to be pertinent to me, given what I am attempting to do. This is similar to what I attempted to do with the boarding pass, right? To create a narrative that you could back out from this. If you've done this well enough, you could almost back out what Debbie's work is all about by looking at this.
I would hope so, right?
Yeah. And if you design of course, the idea of a DBA's top nav is that, well, what does a DBA need to do with a database? Well, DBA needs to look at all the data in the database, every single piece of data in the database, which narrows not at all, right? And this becomes very focused on getting work done. So this becomes more like grandma's kitchen
in the showroom. And this is her old versus her new. So she has to currently manage, this is what her visitors and samples kind of thing works on. They don't have the ability to go back to past dates. So, so she has to manage her own workflow. What do I need to do next? And I'm working on all of that for people in other roles to make sure that they can mostly work on one screen when they need to, do tasks. And then
the thing I think is most important for all of us, maybe the where we related to this most was when you said you were the 4th developer on this project.
Yes, it has been this. It was originally developed, I think this build was started in FileMaker 7. So it's been around the town. So I am obviously
congratulations.
I've been rebuilding the whole thing. So any questions, any comments? Okay.
It's
Yeah,
great.
that was
It's great to see
nice. Sorry, Jonathan. I was going to say a nice breath of fresh air when we first saw your new.
Well, I also want to say I brought this in early on to FMDiSC to get critique and consulting from the group, and they helped me refine a lot of the elements of this interface. So I appreciate that, and it has continued to grow. So I will turn this back over to Albert.
Well, I guess that's part of the strength of this group. It's really I have not seen any user group across the world that has sessions of the quality of this one, and Chris's report and all that's very very inspiring. I hope I've in some way been able to contribute. I think the time is about up. I will say that we'd be very glad to have you attend a future design masterclass when we schedule our next one. We do offer them on site as well, and we have sites in the Hamptons, and that's Long Island, east of New York, just a train ride out of New York that's available if you'd like to take your team to a design masterclass. We have a beautiful Caribbean island off the coast of Puerto Rico that we can offer, and we have offered design masterclasses there on the island of Vieques and here in Miami as well. So I would say that the design masterclass is great for having an entire team, not just a coder, not just developers, not just designers, but everyone involved with an app to be on the same page and to be using the same lingo. And there are specifically elements that allow us to understand the importance of each role many of our FileMaker solutions began with no one but Quant, a coder, which is what I began identifying as. And now I think I have a more fluid identity because there are times I identify as both designer and quant. But the best work we see come when you have a team with folks who are both a little bit different, let's say. I would say not neurotypical, which us quants and us designers are not exactly a neurotypical bunch. Working together with folks who are a little more full, well-rounded human beings like project managers and testers and such. And when you bring all that together, you end up with something that has the characteristics of true craft. And that's very exciting. So we would love to have you along for the ride on a design masterclass. So thanks for watching. I welcome your comments. So proud to show this to you and show you what our team has come up with, what we have unearthed.
Great.
Thanks, Jonathan, for the invite.
Yeah. Thank you, Albert, for coming and presenting again. Been numerous times over the years, and each time you bring a very unique perspective to share with us, and it's great to hear what you're thinking about and working on. So very helpful. Any last questions or comments before we wrap up?
I think we're good.
All right. If not, then wish everybody happy holidays. And we will see you in 2024.
Oh, good.